sorry. Let me know when you're ready, Nave.
Is it being live streamed?
Yes. This is so much interest.
Is there?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Freedom Camping Workshop. Crack a day out there, and everybody's all enthused on the topic at hand. We have an apology from Councillor Manera. Councillor Munns may be a late arrival, and I haven't heard from our two Whakahere members. And I've got nothing there. Oh, is he? Sorry, Francois will be an apology because he's still travelling back from overseas. Did he? All right, so we have a decline from that and an absent, an apology. So that accounts for everybody at the table, and we'll just manage Councillor Munns, who may be slightly late getting here. That's all right. Welcome to Councillor Gillette on the Zoom, and to any members of the public that have tuned in to the workshop and everybody's personal pet hate topic, freedom camping. I will hand straight over to Lee, General Manager, Regulatory and Compliance, to start the workshop off. Thanks, Lee.
Good morning, and thank you. Before we get started, I'll just introduce Vern. So Vern Morris is the compliance team leader, and I've asked Vern just to sit in and help me a wee bit for the discussion and conversation today. He's got a wealth of experience and a lot for the coast as well as we work through this conversation. And Earl will be joining us as well later on, obviously GM for district assets. So thank you. It's an interesting topic, an interesting conversation, and can often be quite emotive and quite polarizing for a number of different reasons. And it's fair to say that it's a very challenging subject for you as council. It's challenging because the roles that you're performing for our district and for the community is that trying to balance the promotion of the district whilst sort of trying to deal with the issues that freedom camping can bring. So for argument's sake, there are businesses within our district whereby people pay for camping. However, the Freedom Camping Act does not allow you to look at trade competition, for argument's sake. And so whilst you might want to say, no, we want to ban freedom camping because we want to promote camping and paid camping in our district, the legislation does not allow you to do that. Also trying to balance for yourselves welcoming visitors and welcoming visitors from a camping point of view, even to the extent that just down on the roundabout here, we have a sign that welcomes campervans. It is a small sign, but it's a sign that welcomes campervans to our district, but also wanting visitors to our district to respect it because it's our home, basically, from that point of view. And sometimes there are views or perspectives that visitors don't respect our home. Is that all freedom campers? I would challenge to say, no, it's not. And some of them will be domestic. Some of them may even live in that district but don't respect it. And so it's balancing all of that, basically. I think my experience of when we talk about freedom camping is that social media hasn't helped. And so there'll be perspectives, there'll be bias, and we all have that we bring to the conversation that often can get into a bit of a feeding frenzy when someone makes a comment about what is perceived to be an issue that freedom campers have undertaken. People just jump on the bandwagon, basically, without having the facts, without having the full picture in relation to what is actually taking place. Freedom camping and the history of freedom camping. Looking back over the last few years, there was funding that was available, so the tourism infrastructure funding, and so councils had previously put in bids and quite successfully, and I know Vern had been leading that for us as a district in getting quite a few $100,000 from central government to provide facilities, toilets and such things for freedom camping to help us manage tourism through our district, which then becomes challenging and problematic when successive governments don't necessarily continue to provide that funding. And so our ratepayers are picking up the bill literally from that point of view. And so then often with other councils be left with the picking up the bill basically. This morning through the conversation could be quite challenging. And when we have the conversations, it can get robust at times because we all have our own perspectives of how we feel about freedom camping. But I look forward to us having that conversation. It will be challenging insofar as Vernon and I might, as I frame it through as we go through the presentation, a bit of a toddler test, is asking why for certain things. If we're saying that we need to have a bylaw, why do we need to have a bylaw? If we're saying we have to protect an area, why do we need to protect an area? What evidence do we have? And we'll talk more about that as we progress through this morning, basically. What I'd like to go through, as you're just looking on the screens, is talk about what the Freedom Camping Act allows you to do. What is freedom camping and what is not freedom camping, basically, just so that we understand what we're dealing with. And just to give a very high level in regards to freedom camping for us with our land, basically, council controlled land, because there's 4 different entities that can deal with freedom camping. And so, yes, as council, but the DOC land, which we have a significant amount of that on the coast, there's the NZTA and there's LINZ land. And so we are not the sole voice in regards to controlling the freedom camping, either in a permissive point of view, restricting it or prohibiting it, basically. There are other entities, organisations that are equally responsible for freedom camping. Then we'll have a look at the history, so our history in relation to freedom camping, with regards to bylaws that we've had, challenges that we've had when we haven't necessarily got it right, and where we are today, basically. Then when we look at the issues, that's the question that I'll put to you, is what is the problem that we're trying to solve for ourselves, basically? Is there a problem that we need to solve, and what does that look like? And that will flow on then to what are some of our options, because often we can just jump straight into, we need a bylaw. We need a bylaw because we've got a freedom camping problem. And I will definitely challenge this morning to say, have we got a freedom camping problem? And what is the extent of that problem? Are there other ways of addressing whatever that problem or perceived problem is with regards to, is it basically a parking issue? And so we're looking at the Land Transport Act. Is it something whereby we've already got controls in place because we're using the Reserves Act and reserve management plans? Or is it the fact that looking at legislation that's potentially coming through the planning bill, this is RMA, the Resource Management Act, and the reform of the Resource Management Act, with spatial planning? And is there a bigger conversation that we need to look at rather than just looking at our districts small? We need to look regional, which is what the planning bill is looking towards, is having a regional spatial plan basically. Putting all that to one side, then we'll look at potential areas for locations of camping, if felt that actually a bylaw is the direction to move towards. Where are some areas where you think, actually, camping could be okay in this location with certain conditions, or absolutely not, we definitely can't have camping in Y location. And then just to finish up, once we look at what potentially a bylaw could look like, a timeline for that, what the challenges in relation to that and the risks in relation to that, or do we have a bit of a watching brief whilst it's a bigger piece of work happening? And we'll touch very lightly on that because I know Helen, our mayor, is having wider conversations because that's what we'll touch on that as well. Any questions so far? Silence is good. Rightio. So what is freedom camping? And when I've got a slide up like this and there's a wee bit of text on there, I'm not intending to read it out. This is just taken from the Act. And I can give you these slides if you'd like a copy of the slides afterwards. Basically, there's no problem at all in relation to that. But basically, freedom camping is, as it suggests, camping in either a vehicle or a tent. And there can be challenges whereby people are sleeping in swags. That's not necessarily camping, but when we're seeing tents or structures, there's the other language that goes with that as well. So often people can have a caravan as such, and then a builded awning. That's freedom camping basically. But there's caveats that will come with that as well. I guess that the challenge when we're looking at what is freedom camping like this, and when we consider restricting or prohibiting, is the balance then of Kiwis having the right to travel around their country to go and camp, basically. And that is often a challenge that councils and the other organisations need to try and balance, because it's not always overseas visitors that are necessarily causing an issue, if an issue is being caused. It can be domestic visitors as well to our districts from that point of view. And that's the same throughout New Zealand from that perspective. When we look at freedom camping then, and we look at vehicles first and foremost, certified self-contained vehicles is one that springs to mind. And so this is where your stickers come into it. And I know stickers has been a conversation in the past, and that is previous legislation was a blue sticker. I think it's a green sticker now that people see on the back of vehicles. And often we can look at that to go, well, is that actually a certified self-contained vehicle? And those stickers can be copied and stuck on anywhere, or any type of vehicle from that point of view. What we're looking at though is the certificate or the warrant that is basically in the screen. And so those stickers from memory are the NZMCA, so the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association, has looked at those stickers in the past and done the tests in relation to, does the vehicle have the necessary standards to allow that vehicle to be warranted as a certified self-contained vehicle. And so it's got storage for water, both grey and black from that point of view. It's got a toilet, which is the primary issue, that is in a fixed position that can be used. But it's also then, with the change of legislation, it's also the plumbers, gas fitters and drain layers regulations. So that industry, that board, are the ones that also assess those vehicles. And so if we're looking at the vehicles, often we can just see a vehicle parked up and it's got a green sticker on the back, and there's no way that that's got a toilet fixed inside there. But it's the warrant that we need to be looking at to make sure that warrant is valid. And if there are issues in relation to that, we can report that back to the NZMCA or to the plumbers, gas fitters and drain layers board, basically, for them to investigate from that point of view. When I've dealt with freedom camping in the past, it's always the certified self-contained vehicles, which is a positive way to go, because obviously they've got all those facilities on board. The non-self-contained is your cars, basically, from that point of view, and your tenants, principally speaking. And are they negative? Well, if we have facilities through our district, is there an issue in relation to someone camping next to where we've got toilet facilities? And so, by way of example, well, Cass Square, we've got a beautiful toilet block there, and often there are vehicles that have got campers inside there, freedom campers. Is there an issue with that, with the fact that they're using the toilet facility? Are they causing any noise issues? Are they leaving litter? Are they defecating everywhere? I haven't seen any issues, and I live pretty local to Cass Square. Is that a problem? Is that a problem that if we had that through our district, whereby camping is permitted in tents or in non-certified vehicles, basically? Or not? That's the question to you. Is it a problem? Some may feel that it is.
I don't think it is, based on the fact that if it's during the daytime and someone stops outside the Cass Square toilets, it's not a problem. When the sun goes down, it suddenly becomes a problem, especially when people have accommodation that they want to sell. But then I always feel that with accommodation, they have to offer something that someone wants. It's like if I go into a shop, I can't afford to shop at Harrods, so I shop at Kmart. And it's the same with accommodation. If if you get some accommodation, you've got to pay $300 a night. You've got a camper van that you've already spent $200,000 on. Can that accommodation in the commercial sector offer you something that you haven't already got? And so I don't have a problem, like you said, Lee, about no one's defecating outside the public toilets, they're leaving rubbish. So what is the problem? You know, and I think what I'd like to see is places like Albert Town down at Wanaka, similar situations being established near our towns, say like, for example, at the rugby grounds near the old abattoirs, just north of Hokitika, so that people can park there and still shop in town and have a great environment on the beach that's close enough to actually get things going. And just put a simple toilet block there, as Albert Town has. Basically, that's what I've got, is a toilet block with 4 hands in it and a wash basin outside and somewhere where you can get water. And they have thousands of people there paying good money, and it's now a commercial enterprise at the what the Queenstown Council sold to enterprise, but that's a great income for the town and for the tourism sector as a whole, and it keeps things contained. And that's what I like to see.
So that's a managed site,
It is now.
yes, which is what, that's like somebody with a campground. So we're talking about just people parking anywhere. Yeah, because the other thing too, we've got to keep in mind is that the minute council puts a site in, or there's a site put in on behalf of a money generating, you know, for the community, we've got waste to pay for, we've got rubbish to pay for, which comes back on the ratepayers. So if it's privately owned, it's great because they manage it, they get the income that helps to subsidise the costs of managing that site. But it's finding that line between, because the other thing is, I mean, we've got geographically 420k area, so that's here, but it's not all, it's now lanes and everywhere else in between where they set up.
And absolutely, and it's arguable because, you know, Greg, as you're saying, and that started off almost being run like your traditional dock sites are run. It's quite a big area, and it's a big kiosk when you drive in relation to basically, you know, you go and pay, you get your little tag put on your tent or on your windscreen type of thing. And then over time, it's evolved and it's now a commercial operation from that perspective. But then it's, you know, are there those commercial and capabilities here today? Yes. Have commercial entities taken up on that and taken advantage of it? Well, I'd argue no, because they're not there. Why not? Question mark. I don't know the answer to that. Is it because it's not viable, or and that frequent campers wouldn't necessarily use it? Or yes, they would. You know, the dock sites are fairly well utilised, is my understanding from colleagues at dock, which is the same sort of principle from that point of view. But even without those, and to the point that people are camping arguably in some of the streets, is that a problem?
Yes, depending on what their activity is when it's dark.
And so what is the evidence that we've got in relation to the activity when it's dark? And so to give some context in relation to that, which is what we'll get onto further down the line, and Bern and his team had a look at the number of complaints we've had in relation to freedom camping for, say, the last 3 years. 4 on council controlled land. 4. And so we have received a complaint comment with regards to freedom camping, but when we've looked into that, it's been on dockland. It's not been on council controlled land, which is the conversation that we're talking about. So when I say about that total test of asking why do we need to have a bylaw? What is the problem we're trying to fix? Arguably, there isn't necessarily the level of problems. Stephen.
Lee, those 4 complaints, what was the complaining about? Was it just the fact that the person was there and they thought they shouldn't be, or was it the fact that they were defecating, or was it a nuisance?
There was the vehicle there, and they felt that the vehicle shouldn't be there in relation to freedom camping. And so it's not that there's been waste, either human waste or rubbish from that point of view, but there's been noise or issues, or, you know, washing lines strung everywhere from that point of view. Which is really interesting as we, you know, preparing for this conversation, is to look at that, as to what's the scale. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a problem. And maybe there's an education piece for us with our district in relation to the fact that we need to gather the information, the evidence in relation to wherever there is these issues, whether or not it's in Hokitika or Mara or France or Fox, etc., etc. We need that information to be able to inform you, this is what we need to do, and this is the why. Here's the evidence in relation to that.
Do we have any data on, or any, has there been any active conversations with DOC about freedom camping on DOC control land?
And so,
Yes, there has been. There's, I've talked to Tim Shaw, the ops manager here, and in past times had quite a bit to do with Wayne Costello. They actually make a lot of money out of their campsites.
Yeah.
And so they were, I guess approaching it from the viewpoint of a commercial campground operator. So there was not a lot of available space in South Westland. Paringa was as far as we got. We have talked to Tim Shaw recently, the local ops manager, about if there is a bylaw where the DOC staff would like to participate in helping enforce it.
Yeah.
So that's still an open-ended conversation.
Do we know if their data, are they getting complaints, or are they running into issues with people camping outside of their campgrounds on?
Well,
Land?
recently I received a barrage of, I think there was 17 complaints from DOC, from the Haas community about the access to Haas Beach. It's DOC land,
Yeah.
and they have within their power and legislation the ability to prohibit or restrict areas. That car park at the DOC Visitor Centre down there is a prohibited area. I think the area that was under discussion was, so it's probably about 3 k's away from there. So that was, so we put those people right about who actually controlled the land and referred it back to DOC to manage.
Is that heading to Jackson's on the right-hand side,
Yeah.
just past it? Right, yeah.
Just
I've
past
been
the
there.
transfer. Oh, no, that was another one. Sorry, there was another complaint about someone that's built a shanty down there past the transfer station.
Yeah.
so this is where the conversations I alluded to at the start are going, because there's 4 main entities for this conversation of that bigger piece of work, rather than us doing a piece of work in isolation, DOC doing a piece of work in isolation, NZTA and LENS, it's a wider conversation. Go, what's freedom camping look like collectively for us in our district, but also not our district, South Island. And again, we'll touch on that towards the end with what Helen, our mayor, is working on from that point of view.
Can I just ask one quick question of Earl? When Logan was working here, when we had that ability to fine people for inappropriate parking or whatever with freedom camping, he dished out quite a few fines. There was over a dozen infringement notices that he issued. So in particular, what were they for?
Internet, I don't actually know.
It was an interesting trial. I can't think off the top of my head because he did walk me through where they were. But that's quite relevant because if they justified an infringement, then this, because I mean, he had type criteria, but that was actually the ambassadors that we had out there managing it. And they knew where people should and shouldn't be and whose land was what. So actually it'd be interesting for us to know like what those infringement notices were issued for and where.
Potentially, because the legislation generally hasn't changed for that, and that, as we work through the workshop, is looking at the tests basically. And so that could be for health and safety reasons, it could be for access reasons, and then the other one was to protect the area. So there's 3 main criteria of the first test of a reason why you might issue an infringement basically from that one. And accessibility is usually one main one.
I do know that one of the main problems in Franz Joseph and the township is that campaigners, when I'm talking campaigns, talking is not self-contained, just parking anywhere on the street, and then they're just doing their business in the gutter or just off the footpath. And that's probably one of the biggest problems in Franz Joseph, the township itself. And that's also we vans that aren't self-contained.
Literally in the streets.
Yes, literally in the street.
Right. Have we got evidence of that?
Yes.
Right. When is this happening? Because we're not seeing that. so to speak. From a staffing point of view,
Yeah.
the complaints of those issues are not flowing through to us. And so where are the complaints coming from and going to for us to get that evidence to start looking at that to go, hey, actually, we have an issue here that we need to look at. And is that a camping issue or is that a parking issue? Question mark. We don't need to solve that one at the moment. But there are other options potentially that we can utilise in relation to the fact that we don't want vehicles in this location, basically. We don't want camping in this location. And that's where the restriction or the prohibition could come in under a bylaw as well.
So how do you manage it then if somebody just parks there 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, surround friends, goes and has a beer, tea, come back to camper van and they still park there overnight? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we have got going on in Friends, a little bit of the Fox. Yeah.
Got an easy solution.
And all kinds to that.
Paid parking.
Eh?
Paid parking, that could be an easy solution. Generate revenue. Residents are exempt and you probably, once people see that paid parking, there might be a good enough deterrence to not park up overnight.
You're talking even the end of some roads at the base of tracks.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about on the main drag and.
Yeah, no, I'm talking the
Right,
side
yeah.
streets. So,
Okay,
but that's been an ongoing problem in Friends as long as I can remember
Yeah.
with Freedom Camping we had a problem.
Yeah.
So.
And so again, today I'm looking to understand what the problems are so we can go away and try and find some solutions for you and bring it back to you to say, taken on board, paid parking is certainly the conversations that we've been having as well to say, in some circumstances, paid parking may be a solution, but also maybe something that you want to consider anyway outside of this conversation from a freedom camping point of view. But it's for us to understand what is the problem so that we can then say, hey, we're not seeing the evidence in relation to the problem that we're raising with us. How do we go and get that evidence? How do we inform the local communities then to raise those issues and send those issues in so that we build that evidence. So when we bring it back to you to say, believe that you need a bylaw for Fox and France, for argument's sake, this is what it could look like. This is the reasons why, because you have to be satisfied as council that there's a reasonable reason to put in place the bylaw, because if you don't, you are likely to be challenged on it. And by that, through litigation. And if you don't have robust information or evidence, it is likely that you will not be successful in retaining that bylaw. Something that we'll touch on shortly as well.
Because we have had lots of anecdotal comments and feedback. But I had nothing, or not a lot of formal complaints and things that we can list through our system. Docs, basic thing is that they generally support freedom camping. They don't do bans, they don't do ad hoc bans, it's got to meet the criteria, what is the criteria on it.
That's my real concern. We've all gathered here today, you're spending time and energy on this, and there's 4 complaints. I don't see it as an issue with 2 million domestic visitors a year, 4 complaints. You know, I think you need to do the spatial planning first and find out where people can actually go and park and then come back and then decide where the freedom camping can and cannot happen. But if we can't enforce it, it's a dead duck from the outset, you know, and it's a waste of the council's time and energy that you could be prioritizing on more important things to the ratepayers, in my view. And I know Brian, I asked him this morning because he phoned me to say he couldn't make it. Do you have any commentary, feedback? He said, no, it's not financially viable. We have no money. So it's not something he's willing to support. So
What is he not willing to support?
this freedom camping bylaw or the kind of draconian kind of overview of locking these people down in some way.
I find that interesting because Brian's had a huge problem.
It's just what he told me.
Kekapohai.
You can call him if you
Yeah.
like. But
Oh, I talked to him often about this because at Kekapohai, where he's frequently, as are the farmers down there, pulling people off beaches with their tractors. Get out there and the sand can be quite soft. But the defecation in his area has been absolutely horrific. And they are inclined to leave their rubbish behind, presuming that somebody will come along and pick it up. Ratepayers bear the brunt of that cost.
And so is that on council land or is that on dock land or is that? And again, this is
It's
what,
on the foreshore.
And
It's
it's road reserve. It's predominantly where they park is road reserve.
When we set up that site, we put bins, when it was funded through IMBY, we had toilets and bins. And we actually had freedom campers videoing locals filling up the bins so that then they're overflowing and then there were complaints. And we had all that hoo-ha in the media. It was led by a campground owner down there causing trouble. But there was never a problem when we had managed sites. We had 7 of them through, it was all funded up. It was good, clean.
It was.
Yeah, look, once again, I think managed sites is the way to go. Because then we know where they are and people can still pay for their rubbish, just like dock. You know, all the dock sites now, they're done online if you want to stop there, like Kids Bush and places like that, the Wild. And they make really good money out of them. They're nice, clean, tidy sites. And it would be an income for council and we'll be able to structure it so that people can come here and enjoy it. And it wouldn't be a burden on a small rate base for the amount of people that are visiting here. And not only that, I think in the Freedom Camping Act, there is a legislation that allows people to camp or sleep wherever they like if they're considered homeless or do not have residence. And so that leaves it wide open for litigation should they want to challenge that. And then it's up to a compliance officer to evaluate whether or not it's actually prudent to pursue a prosecution or a fine. I think that the whole Freedom Camping Act is very hard to manage. It's very hard to manage. And what I'd like to see to counteract that is to have good signage that actually educates people what our values are about what you do in the bush, and it's not acceptable. Because in the same, when people fly into New Zealand, there should be a decent sized pamphlet that says what our values are regarding freedom camping and what we expect from visitors to keep our green image.
it's like you've been reading my slides. I'll come back to that later. Greg, absolutely. Don't disagree with what you're saying. But you know, from the education side of it, because education is key. It takes time and it takes money though as well in relation to that, and that's a constant because we're getting visitors coming through all the time. So it has to be easy to understand. And part of the challenge that we've got is signage that we have may be different to Bray, to Buller, to Queenstown Lakes, etc., etc. And so that comes back down to this bigger piece of work and the bigger question in relation to what is the problem? And where we direct our energies, but to have a collective solution rather than an individual solution.
Hey, can I ask you, where was the last place you went on holiday?
New Zealand, basically. For me, I holiday in the hills.
Okay, anywhere abroad in the last 5 years?
No. No.
Where's the furthest place in New Zealand you've been to?
I've travelled all through New Zealand.
Okay, so East Cape,
Yes.
what are the bylaws up there?
I couldn't tell you.
Exactly.
Couldn't tell you.
Foreigners, tourists, they don't know anything about bylaws. You go to a country, you're there for whatever activity you're there for. You have, even if you try and educate them, you will never be able to tell them what the local bylaws are. The drinking one's slightly different because you have signs around the town. So you can educate them with signs in certain places about bylaws. And international tourists, I think, would pay heed to them because they'll see the sign. They might not want a fine. They might think it might follow them all the way through to customs and whatnot. But the locals will probably just ignore it. So, you know, bylaws great in principle, but you can't enforce them. You know, it's hard to.
I'll definitely come back to the enforcement challenge in relation to that. I'll definitely come back to that topic again. Yeah.
It's interesting that the other day, or a few weeks ago, a freedom camper was fined in Queenstown $800, freedom camping on the side of the street. In court, he pleaded that he was tired and he needed to have a sleep. Well, in the Freedom Camping Act, it actually allows for that. And I thought, well, maybe there was other extenuating circumstances that led the judge to actually fine the guy, even though the judge said he accepts that the traffic, you know, Health New Zealand suggests that if you are tired, that you should pull over and have a sleep. So it was interesting to see how the judge, you know, fined the guy on that. But
It
that's
wasn't
just
a-
another
It
issue.
wasn't just a short nap. It wasn't just a park over sleepy head.
And that's what, in looking at, I'll come to that point in 2 slides time, I think it is.
Can I just, before we go on to the next one, it just, freedom camping, I think, you know, we're sort of missing. Freedom camping isn't in a box. We've got the self-contained responsible campers. And if I was to go out camping around the country, I would like to be self-contained. So I have the privilege of being able to park wherever I want to park, by the beach, by the river, by the lake, fishing rod out, whatever. The other situation we've got is we've got vehicles that are not self-contained, have no ability to manage their waste, no matter whether it's rubbish or fecal. And that is another situation we have, and we've got to look at it and not put everybody into one box. There's one component we can manage, and there's another one we can't. And it's actually that one that we can't manage that is actually at the crux of most of what I'm hearing here at the table and how we manage them. So, you know, everybody's got to actually understand that we can't put everything into one box, because there's actually, we've got segments that fit into the freedom camping, but it's, you know, you've got your self-contained and you've got your non, and they create different problems. But what is primarily the biggest problem we have, which in essence is the non?
The legislation doesn't.
I know that, but that's what we're talking about here. And that's the problem that everybody else has around the countryside, is that it's one box the government's created, but it's 2 different factions that fit that one box. And we're trying to manage one of them. Sorry.
I don't disagree with that. And again, for us, when we think locally, what is our problem? And so when we're raising these comments, we then need to see evidence in relation to our problem. Otherwise, when we bring the recommendation to you, it's going to be really hard to recommend certain things because we won't necessarily have the evidence. We'll follow whatever, when we get no decisions again today, let's just be crystal clear. It's, you know, it's a conversation today, but we will have to bring a report to you in the near future with regards to a recommendation of this pack, of watching brief for argument's sake, this pack, bylaw, and the reasons for that, and what the risks are on both sides, basically. Don't disagree with your point. And it's difficult because we have to work within the confines of what the legislation provides us. What I'm saying is that depending on the problem, there are different pieces of legislation that may be better suited to address the issues that we're having. It's not necessarily the Freedom Camping Act. So what is freedom camping after all of that conversation? Or what is not, rather, in this situation? To the point, Joseph, I think you raised earlier, it's paid parking. Well, short-term parking, that's not freedom camping. It's a different matter that we're looking to address from that point of view. Your day excursions and so on and so forth. And again, doesn't mean that we can't have paid parking in certain locations, but that's a different conversation. But it's part of a wider conversation of, you know, when we talk about spatial planning, what is that bigger picture for what we're looking at, basically? There's different ways of addressing different issues for what we want for our community. And Greg, to your point there, the last point of having a rest by the roadside is not freedom camping. NZTA promote that for the obvious reasons from a safety perspective, but that's usually a short nap of about 40 minutes, I think, is what they've got, generally speaking, is a rest, versus it might be 4 hours or 8 hours sleeping. I don't know the circumstances of that conversation with firms. To your other point, I think it was earlier, of homelessness. So if someone says that they have nowhere else to go and they're in a tent, for argument's sake, this is a real challenge from an enforcement point of view of someone who's got that situation you were describing down towards the south of our district, of if that's their home, they're not freedom camping. And so what do we do? That's a bigger social issue in relation to that. That's real hard for us to address. Should we be even looking at that? Yes, no. I don't have an answer for it from that side of things, but that is a big social matter that other districts are wrestling with as well. Some arguably in a much bigger issue from a homelessness point of view than what we have. I don't know the answer to that one. But it's difficult when we are there, if we're enforcing a bylaw for argument's sake of who is freedom camping, who is not. Yeah, that's a hard one.
We travelled around North Cape, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And when we went to Gisborne, we went to the council there, and you could pay, they had about 5 or 6 sites that around the North Cape were council controlled. I think we paid about $15 a night. There was 3 of us in the van, and we're self-contained. And we paid $15 a night, and we could stay at any one of those sites. And we were issued with a big rubbish bag at the council, and we headed off and stayed at the first one where there's some portable toilets and a big skip if you want to chuck a rubbish bag in there. But the 4th one we stayed at, that's where you dumped that rubbish bag in that skip and went on our way. And to me, it was really, really cheap. You know, we would have been happy paying more than that. And I thought it worked really well. There was all the sites, some were full some nights, but some weren't. And it was, the good thing about that was that the Gisborne Council knew where people were, where they were camping, and there was an element of control, and there was an income that came from it. I don't know if it probably didn't pay for itself what they're charging, but you know, that could be adjusted like that. And when we look at sites like Kamara, which is not a camping ground, and it relies on donations, I can't see why it shouldn't be a fee. You know, but apparently it comes into the Camping Ground Act, so it's different again, but if other councils do it, why can't we? You know, and from people I've spoke to up there, they said they do get quite a bit of money coming through it, but even if it's sometimes foreign currency that they get, but you know, I think that solves a bit of a problem and takes pressure off other places. It's a very tidy spot. You know, got good toilets.
I think the problem is we've got here is that we're not Gisborne. Gisborne's here, we're here. And we have so many offshoot areas, and it's really, really hard for us. I mean, we've got Ogrito, we've got Kamara, work exceptionally well, run by the communities, and they do control it exceptionally well. But we've got 1,001 other areas that don't fit that ability. And that's, I think, our biggest problem. We can have things like that. It's working and working really well.
Yeah.
It's all the other places that, but are hard to manage.
It's
when we put in.
really hard,
Mm.
really hard. And this is not a new problem for yourselves.
Particularly if you've got businesses there that are already providing camping services, and then you all of a sudden setting up
Yes.
opposing camping
Yes,
services.
yes. Yes, that's when you create animosity.
So this is just an FYI in relation to when we talk about freedom camping, is that the Act specifically says that you cannot, as a carte blanche, prohibit freedom camping. It also, through case law, is that if you have a bylaw that is so restrictive that it basically prohibits it anyway, again, you can't do that. And there's been litigation with regards to that with other councils, to say, no, that's a no-go from that point of view. So when we're looking at potential bylaws, what the Act says, the Act basically has the premise that you can camp anywhere. So that's the baseline for the Freedom Camping Act. However, when the legislation, it's a pretty blunt tool, to be perfectly honest, in saying that there are some areas in districts that are not actually suitable for freedom camping for different reasons, and we'll get onto those in a second. What the Act then allows you to do is to restrict camping or to prohibit. This is where, when we come back to what is the problem, we'll get onto the problem in a bit more discussion in a second, is that's when you would look at it. So for argument's sake, let's just say Franz Joseph, by way of an example, for X reason, that we want to prohibit freedom camping in Franz Joseph, with the evidence to support it. That's what we would do. We'd have the signage, and then we would enforce in relation to that. Easy for them to say, I know, but that's how that would work. Or to say, well, actually, we want to restrict freedom camping to certified self-contained vehicles only. And within France, we're going to say that the main highway going through, we don't want large camper vans on there, but we'll have large camper vans in an off street, for argument's sake. Then we're looking at the restrictions and making sure we've got the signage in relation to those restrictions versus the prohibition. Outside of that, freedom camping is allowed, and that's where the permissiveness comes in and what the baseline of what the Act enables you to do. All right. So this is the fun part. And this is what I've called almost the toddler test when we look at freedom camping. And so there's three main tests. And so the first test has got those three criteria at the top there under A. So if we're looking to restrict or prohibit freedom camping in any part of our district, those 3 points of 1, 2, and 3 under A are the criteria that we need to consider. And so if we're saying that we need to protect an area, what I'm going to ask you is why? Why do we need to protect that area? And what evidence have you got to be able to demonstrate why we need to protect an area? Or we need to protect it for health and safety reasons, or for access reasons. And so anytime when we're having a conversation or someone raises with me to say, I think we need to stop this, well, why? What is your evidence? Because anecdotal, I understand, and I can appreciate the challenges. But it's really difficult for me to give you the best advice to know that if we're going to push ahead with something, that we stand a really good chance of winning any challenge from a litigation point of view if we haven't got evidence. We need to have strong evidence. The other parts that go with that as well, so B, when you're looking at it, that links in with A, is making sure that it is appropriate and proportionate. If we don't do that with good evidence, there is a strong likelihood you will be challenged through litigation. And we've had a history of that for ourselves here. We don't need to mention any names. we have been challenged, and we've had to suspend previous bylaws. Other councillors who have pushed ahead with their bylaws have been challenged, and the High Court has not gone in the council's favour. And so that bylaw has had to be redone, basically. We don't want to be in that situation, A, because it's more work, B, it's more time and cost to our ratepayers, basically, of us doing that work.
So if you use the example of Prince Joseph and the people camping in residential areas, Joseph mentioned about parking enforcement might be a better way. I hadn't thought of that before, but it might be a better way just to put up some, we've got a parking bylaw. It would be easier probably to expand that down to residential areas down there rather than to go through all the rigmarole of trying to control freedom camping. Just make it a clear way, no parking overnight, and then it's a parking infringement. Which could be
Easy to manage.
easier to manage.
And these are the considerations that we want to have when we know what the issues are that you're getting information about, basically. And so no one issue is necessarily going to be dealt with in the same way. We might be using different pieces of legislation, a lot of which sits in Earl's camp, to be perfectly honest, pardon the pun, whether or not it's parking or reserves from that perspective, but us working together so that we can address the issues or the problems that are being identified. It's got the evidence there, it's right. And we can give you the best advice. So this is how we're going to address that. Or this one at the moment, we can't fix it because we haven't got sufficient information or evidence. So that's a bit of a watching brief, but we'll bring something back to you in 6 months for arguments.
One of the areas, like on the coast, that we are getting pressure on, like especially on coastal spots, like say the Waitaha or Bolthead Road, places like that, or Ross. It's a sort of a problem down there. I know down Waitaha there can be quite a few camper vans there sometimes. And what's the site like? Is it like a lot of defecation going on there, or?
Sorry, that's the issue we've got, is we're not getting any feedback.
Yeah.
on problems.
Right.
I haven't been down there since we stopped managing the sites, but who would know? Jackson Bay's another one that comes up, seems to.
Every orifice throughout Southwest London has camper vans. No. Part of the reason people don't raise the alarm back to council was because this is problematic for a long time, and this is by no means a reflection on staff or anybody else, but when it has been raised, we haven't had the ability to manage it. Because what do? You know, we just continuously have the bylaw problem. So, and then we have, you know, stickers on camper vans that actually aren't legal, but they've got a sticker that says they are. So, and this has been the constant with it. And it's just got to the stage where people just stop. I mean, you can do that, what is it, snap, see and solve, but where does that go and how do you manage that? Because we've got no teeth to be able to manage the problem, and that's really been the guts of it. We can have somebody go down there and wave a staff. What do? Somebody can tell them to F off, and they really do just have to F off because we do not have the basis to be able to see that. So, you know, like, you know, if you know the area, so down at Waihapo, you know, there's all sorts of lanes that take you down to substations and stuff like that. They're down there. They're down the Wataroa River, and they won't just go there. They'll go around the side of somebody's dairy farm, right down the river behind gorse bushes. So when we've got a flood, we've got people out trying to go around all these areas that will then start to be underwater to look for camper vans, putting their own lives at risk. They go anywhere. I've gone down to pick up the hay rake one morning, and here's our hay rake, but it's covered in somebody's washing. You know, at 5 a.m, you're sitting there pulling off knickers and others and all sorts of stuff. And, you know, they're everywhere down there. And it doesn't matter what area you're talking about, they're there. So, you know, those people want to be able to go and park anywhere. I don't think it's to avoid being caught or anything else. That's how they want to have their holiday. So, you know, we're the visual, we're lucky, but there's a, you know, for everyone that you see that's visually viewable, there's probably 3 or 4 that aren't. So, yeah, it's for us, unfortunately, and talking to the cohorts elsewhere, we do have this as a problem because they can get off the road in so many places and be hidden from the vision. And yeah, for us, it doesn't make it very easy at all. No, we can't.
I'm sorry, really.
No, and that's the thing, we're blessed with so much different ownership, variety of ownership of land. And that's the other side of it, you know, you go to tell somebody off, but they're actually not on our land. So we're in jurisdiction, it's not on Doc's land, Lynn's land, you know, everything else. So it really is for us a doozy of a problem to manage.
But your worship, if it's such a significant issue, we should be directing the ratepayers that are impacted by this to be contacting the council so that we have the metrics to make a decision. Because I'm not hearing any metrics at all that leads us to, you know, put any forcible solution forward.
It doesn't have much at all in the way of problems compared to everywhere else. Janilla's nodding, she knows what I'm talking
Well,
about,
that's
South
fine,
Westland.
but I think we need those ratepayers to contact us if it's an issue. We can't work off hearsay and stories, you know, we need facts. That's my opinion. I don't know what other councillors around the table think, but
If we go out and
I'm
ask,
happy to, you know, follow through if the public wants action, but we need to know if the public wants action, and I'm not hearing it.
And again, I'll keep coming back to, there's no decisions being made here today. This is a conversation for us.
It's a debate, isn't it?
So when we bring a report back to you, that will be the point where you're going to have to make a decision based on this conversation. Right?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that we've asked these people to come here, and it's up to us to manage it in a cost-effective way that doesn't impact on the ratepayers negatively. Because the fact is that the percentage of tourists that far outweighs the population of ratepayers. But I think overriding all that is the current global situation that we may find that next year we don't have any tourists. And I think we have to keep that in mind before we start spending a lot of money now to try and alleviate this problem. What I'd like to see is just put a bit of a hold on things till maybe another 8 months and just see what happens, because I can't see the point in sort of going down the road and spending a lot of money and signage and everything else and trying to sort things out until we know what's going to happen globally. I think that's going to be a massive impact on tourism.
Stephen,
Yeah, look, I think we should stop this nonsense now. This, as soon as we pass a bylaw, this whole freedom camping becomes our problem. If we don't put a bylaw in place, it sticks with who enacted and created this piece of legislation in the first place, central government. We should just leave it alone. As soon as we put a bylaw in place, we're compelled to enforce it. We don't have any ability to enforce it. It just is a cost and a distraction that we just can't afford. We should just leave it. The central government, they created it, make it their problem.
Thank you.
What we're sharing ideas, I did make a few little notes, but yeah, I would hope that ultimately we're here to represent the community, so I think we really do need to find what the community wants. It's really important to me that we keep Westland residents or ratepayers access to the region open with whatever we do. We want them to be able to enjoy their own backyard. I've made a note about what is the size of the problem we've gone over. You know, are these isolated issues? Is it, you know, or are little bespoke solutions for certain problem areas a more efficient solution than a big piece of work? But then again, for constantly just making up little solutions, is it better to really look at the big picture and do a bigger piece of work in partnership with the other parties like DOC and, you know, have it not necessarily a bylaw, but have a good long-term solution. Anything we do, I think, should be based off the facts, like Councillor Mackenzie said. And right now, we're not really hearing a ton of facts. We're hearing, I think, a lot of loud, emotional responses to issues. But I'd like to see some evidence. I think we've got to keep in mind that freedom campers, if we show them hospitality, they will return to our region, you know, in the future, and with money, and not as freedom campers possibly, as higher spend tourists. So we want to make sure that we're offering hospitality to our region. There is some ideas that I've got, like, you know, we've got quite a unique region where we have got 3 accesses into our region. I mean, possibly on all 3 accesses, we could have a kiosk which says, you know, welcome to Westland. Are you planning on freedom camping? And maybe some information which drives them to maybe certain areas that we've set up where we want freedom campers to go, or maybe lets them know sort of the etiquette around freedom camping in our region. Perhaps in the urban areas, looking at expanding the parking rules could be solutions for those urban areas. But I think it's a bit of a tightrope that we're walking. And I just want to make sure that, you know, whatever solution we come up with sort of fits the problem. We're not sort of looking for a solution in search of a problem.
If you can, I suppose, you know, prove that littering or use of waste, you can always issue the fines under the legal policy. You've got to get agree with it, but that's, you know, it's an option when you can start finding people.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Stephen, for your comment as well, just in relation to that wider from a central government point of view, from that perspective. Just going to bring it back to the conversation that we were having for these tests as well. And I'm just making my own notes so that when we bring the report back, I'll try and reflect the conversations of today, because there's, like any community, there's competing views in relation to this subject, and it is not straightforward. It is really not straightforward. The last one I just wanted to make you aware of with these tests, though, is, and it's linking into, from a Kiwi point of view, is the New Zealand Bill of Rights. It's the right for freedom of travel, basically. And so anything that we put in place needs to make sure that we're not contradicting the New Zealand Bill of Rights for that very point. Which again is really difficult. It comes back to the evidence to support why we think that we should have a restriction or prohibition.
Can I just ask a question, Lee? And I'm not sure whether there's an answer here today or not, but it occurs to me that, you know, in every conversation that I've had about freedom camping, it's a very, as you said, a very emotive issue, because it affects those people that are being directly affected by it, those homeowners who are going outside their gates and finding things that are less than savoury on their drives, etc., etc. So I can understand why there's a high level of frustration and high energy that comes out of this around that, because I would be exactly the same way if that was happening outside of my residence. But one of the things I did want to check was, have we got any places where we can see where they're not excessive, but there's a mid-house, if you like, where there have been some things that have been put in place to make things easier for when people do want to do a type of camping that's slightly different to a motor camp without putting a huge burden on the ratepayers. Because it seems to me what we're talking about generally are people who are, it's a small percentage that are causing, I think, a large problem for the rest of them. For those people who do want to come, they can't all be doing this. There must be people that just want to come and enjoy the country, etc. Are there things that we could do that would assist them, like that other councils have done? Have they put more facilities in for I don't know, picking up rubbish or putting electrical points in, or things that could help, that would make people feel like that they're being a bit assisted, but we're not going the full yards in terms of ratepayers having to bear the burden of it. I just think there's got to be some compromise position that we get to once we've established what the real problem is, that we might just want to think about. And I didn't know whether we've had experiences of that anywhere else in the country where that's worked well. I guess the reason I was thinking about it was when we went down south, we stopped at the place that was by the salmon farm, and they had put some facilities in there. And we had. And admittedly, the people that were in control of that facility were actually helping us manage that stuff. But they seemed to have a good response from people that came in and went out. And I just wondered whether maybe that's something to think about as well.
So on that site that Barb's referring to, Ben Monk had a salmon farm, doesn't have a salmon farm, he has a farm adjoining, and he still manages that site for us with the toilet there. He also personally manages the rubbish and the disposal of the rubbish, which is saving ratepayers significantly. The other problem he has is on the other side of the river, the vehicles can get down the riverbank and along the river and beside the bed, and they do that quite consistently. So if there's a weather event, that's his first place to go, is to get people out of there quickly. So you're relying on residents that live in these places to do and go beyond the call of duty. They appreciate having the people having the right to camp and enjoy our countryside, but there is other sides to the coin. And I would just like to say that for the councillors that sort of say, well, we're not aware of a problem, so there isn't one. I would urge you to get out there and talk to people, not just in your own region that you represent, throughout Westland, because this is a problem that's been boiling away for a long time. And as I said earlier, the bylaw makes it hard to manage. We've since seen a growth in the uncertified market, which is predominantly where the problem is coming from. So get out there before we dismiss this and sort of say we can roll this over. We have to do something now to assist the management next season, because it's only going to keep on escalating. And the numbers that are here, yes, Greg, you are correct with the fuel impact. We are now seeing some predictions coming forward for next year's tourism season to say it will be checked. But there's been very little in the way of cancellation of camper vans, both self-contained and non, for next year at this stage, because they've basically a lot of them booked out already. So please don't be dismissive and say, because you haven't heard anything or aren't aware of anything, that there isn't a problem. Because rest assured there is a problem, and it's significant. We're talking 420 k's distance-wise without all the other roads that people can get off. We're talking that Paringa place can have anything from 55, I think his biggest number's been 87 camper vans squashed into a park. And when we actually ran parks, we had people actually packing in. The first one in would have to wait till the last one's in left to vacate in the morning. That's how tightly they pack into these areas when they arrive. And out of what packs into these areas, probably 2/3 of them are your non-self-contained vehicles versus your self-contained ones. Your self-contained ones are the ones that are responsible, that will go and park anywhere and use the facilities that they have on board. It's the problem we have here is actually the other ones that don't. They're here for a cheap holiday. They want to be able to park wherever and see whatever and go wherever. And they are the ones, if you get out and talk to the people throughout Westland, they'll be the ones that constantly get pointed out to you as being the primary problem that they have. The other side of it, as I said before, is it's the ratepayers that are actually paying for this by rubbish. And it doesn't matter if some locals go and dispose of their rubbish in our containers, we know that, particularly in France. But it's also the fact that DOC have pulled out a lot of their facilities, a lot of their campsites. They don't do rubbish collection anymore. So all that rubbish now goes into our communities and gets dumped in those bins for our darling ratepayers to have to manage the cost of. So it's quite a complex, diversified problem that we've got to look at. And once you get your heads around the reality of the situation and the different factors within it, then we've got to piece together what we do, what we can do versus what we can't, and what we're prepared to do.
When we were fortunate enough to have the centrally government funded, we had seven fully serviced sites. There was a bottleneck at Paringa because we couldn't get anything further south of there. So but bear in mind, Ben Munt was doing very nicely with the 80 odd vans and the pies and points and things after hours and using his Wi-Fi, and to the extent where he was going to put in a salmon fishing pond and run kayak excursions up the river. Then COVID happened, so that kind of killed those ideas. When I was meeting with INBI and talking about the various different options around the place, they were impressed that Westland were the only ones at that stage that were partnered up with private businesses like the Kamara Junction Cafe and the Treetop Walkway. When the funding ran out, I went and saw Vonnie and Doug and said, look, we'll pull the toilets out. And they said, no, leave them. They're bringing in income and bringing in tourists and visitors and things. And so when we were dealing with Campermate Rankers, and there were 3 apps that we were using, I put on those apps, look, the land is provided gratis by Treetop Walkway. Please support the business, go and buy coffee or have a breakfast or do the attraction. And it worked very well. So they took over servicing and cleaning the toilets while we had no funding, and then it changed hands and that stopped. But private council partnerships are something that we should be looking at.
A good solution for us. Where they are possible.
And for instance, at Sunset Point, I think Alicia raised, putting 6 or 7 slots up there, and you could put pay per use things on there and make some money. And there's toilets and bins here that we're paying for anyway.
Again, it comes down to education. Like we need to tell our visitors when they arrive, these are all your options. And you can, the Woodstock takes Freedom Camp.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
There's quite a lot of that around. But how do people know about? I mean, there's the apps.
Well, exactly.
Rankers and
They all look at those. I looked at the Ask Beach one, and that was having massive hits, on their dock length each day.
Is that the same in Otero? Does the pub there have camper vans around?
Yeah, he does. He charges them, I think, $20 a night or something to stay there. I don't know how well used it is or patronised.
You've got to remember, like that Paringa there at the salmon farm. I mean, we still pay for those toilets,
Yes,
servicing,
yes.
the maintenance,
Yes.
everything's there. So everywhere you put up those toilets are really expensive. Further south. it goes.
In the vein.
When, with the funding, were they removed from some locations or?
Some of them were permanent, like Baringa ones. Others we got 769 grand, I think, was the kick-off. That was to set up. We bought the waterways and the rubbish bins and paid for all of the woods roads to put on all the sites, the 7 sites, and put gravel on them and buns and all that sort of thing. And then it was 400k a year to manage and service those sites, and that was the septic cleaning, the rubbish removal, the maintenance and mowing the lawns and all that sort of thing. Yeah. But we didn't have the issues when we had those funded sites, because while we were saying you can't go here, but you can go here, and it worked very well.
Question for Helen. You obviously you hear some of this feedback from this problem. Seems like is mostly a South Westland problem in our region. What sort of solutions are you hearing from people, other than people complaining and saying, or finding laundry on your land or whatever? Is anyone putting forward any solutions to you? Have you heard any?
So back when Mayor Smith was at the helm, so I was on council at the time. So one of the solutions was we created park sites. We created up towards Serpentine. There was a pull-off area there which has now got rocks on it. we put a couple of portaloos at one end. And unfortunately, they wouldn't walk from that end to that end to use the portaloo, they just went in the scrub. So we went out every so often and visually had a look at that. Friends Joseph, we had one on the south side of Friends, it was a big pull-off area there, we had the same there, I think we even put some gravel into that space there. And honestly, all around it was just defecation. It was disgusting, you could smell it as soon as you got out of the car. And these people were prepared to actually camp in those sites arriving to that. It was revolting. So we did create, we had more, I can't think where the others were. We had we had another one down in Southwest London where it was off the road on a corner. The only problem was we actually ended up with a significant crash there because those that couldn't fit in kind of parked in the entranceway, lights off, cars come, bang. And so that got dismantled virtually straight away. We had 5, that's 3. I can't think where the other 2 were, but we trialled them, we put toilets in some of these places and everything else, and we just didn't see a change in behaviour.
Waterrow Gorge was one.
Waterrow Gorge was another one, so that's
That worked
cool.
very well, and we had signage up saying, this is a flood area.
Yeah, that probably worked the best out of all of them, if I think, remember back. So we did try that, and the funding to look at that as well as the management of that was removed, but that was later, wasn't it, for the ambassadors that we had. And so it just stopped. And we just let the problem disperse and keep going. But when we actually tried to manage it, we couldn't contain the numbers. It was just, there was too many for every park. And if we'd say, this park, you can have 8 camper vans, we would have ended up with 18. That was the problem we had. It didn't matter if we did try to put a toll on how many could park there, they weren't interested, they just parked. So, but it got onto their apps very quickly that these sites were available and they did target them, but we had no means of actually controlling the numbers and their behaviour once there.
Kuku Reserve was in.
Yeah.
Through the chair, in the vein of what Barb was discussing and the recent discussion, it seems like it's more a waste management issue than freedom camping. Is that, people dumping rubbish, people defecating, as opposed to where they're parked or, whether they're bothering people for being parked. Things like that. And I don't know if Earl can verify this, but when I was walking in Tira, there was an issue in Tira. They used to have a big rubbish bin so the locals could put the rubbish there. But all the boaties from Canterbury were dumping all their rubbish in it on their way back home after leaving Lake Runner. And so that bin was removed. And now they don't have any rubbish collection. They've got to take the rubbish all the way down to Jackson's, which for our ratepayers is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so if it's more waste management, then let's have a waste management forum or workshop and solve that rather than freedom camping and, as Greg said, putting people off coming and enjoying the great outdoors here.
It's the freedom campers that are creating that waste problem though.
But in Otira, it wasn't freedom campers, it was entitled locals from Canterbury.
But
So
that's just one example.
Well, it is, but that's data that Earl can probably back up that was happening, was it? Yeah.
I know, through the chair, I've been listening to you when I've been driving. Talking to people in France on Friday, their biggest thing is taking up the main road with their big vehicles, and the ones that are coming through cannot get parks. So that's their biggest thing. They want somewhere that they can let people know where they can go and park safely off the road that has maybe got rubbish bins there, I don't know, but somewhere that they can send people freedom parking. Here it is, park up here, because their town has just been destroyed with the disgust. And it's and I've witnessed it, but I didn't take a photo. It's a privacy thing too. It's like, how do you take photos without breaching the Privacy Act? To get the evidence for you.
Yeah.
Janelle, do you think it's, because there's a difference between a parking issue and a camping issue. Like, we all know that Friends is not an easy flow through if you're trying to drive through or park, and it's very congested and it's difficult just on a day-to-day, let alone in everyday cars and use, etc. As opposed to if they had a site somewhere where the bigger vehicles could park and then walk back into town and do what they needed to do and then leave, or whether the bigger vehicles park and camp.
They're parking overnight.
Right, okay.
But is there,
That's the thing, they pull in and they park overnight, and those that are coming in to go to the landing for dinner can't get a park because the camper vans are all parked along there, but they're actually not going to get dinner.
No, because they're parked to
But
camp.
they're parked to camp.
Right.
Because it's safe, there's lights, there's toilets across the road, it's,
so with what Councillor Mills raised and what was discussed earlier about kind of partnerships with private enterprise, should we be contacting Scenic Hotels to utilise that old hotel that's now defunct? It's got a big car park and camper vans could be going in there and park, and that can be dedicated for these bigger vehicles. And it's only a short walk to the town from there.
It is.
But it's sitting there derelict and not being
We
used.
can't use the site because it's not been cleared up from when the flood went through, so it's health and safety, they won't allow
But they could easily put a fence line up around the building and just have it for parking.
the whole site.
I don't know, I've not been in there. 'cause
I
it's-
have, the whole
it's
site
locked off.
is off grounds. There's diesel went through it, there's stones, there's wire, there's metals, there's all sorts just throughout the grounds.
It's also private property, it's not.
Yes.
No, I know, but if you approach Scenic Hotels, they might see a business opportunity in doing something there.
you don't want to charge, yeah.
I
You
mean,
don't want to
it's-
charge,
I mean,
you've already got camping grounds there, you know.
It's unfortunate that, yeah, I mean, it's very hard to manage parking. That's NZTA on that road there, so we have to work in conjunction with them. We put in some kind of restriction. I don't know, people want the tourists and that to come, but then they complain when they come.
I know, and then they park
So-
inside roads, and yeah.
But that's helpful to understand that problem. Because for us, and the conversation that we had earlier, that's a different problem to the conversation that we were having. For us to understand, to go, okay, what are the options in relation to that problem, which I can totally understand. We can gather more information, evidence in relation to that as well. But that is a completely separate issue to the previous issue. That arguably may be easier for us to address through other legislation than the freedom camping from a bylaw perspective for that. But that's really helpful for us to understand that, very much so. Good conversation. A lot of that is going to feed into the next couple of slides in a second, so we'll come back to it. What I just wanted to give you was a very brief overview of some of our history, just in relation to freedom camping, whereby when we've had bylaws previously and we haven't necessarily challenged ourselves with regards to bylaws, they have been challenged for us. And like with other councils, we're not alone in this space whereby we've had to reflect on that and maybe suspend that and reconsider it, basically. And so as we work through all of that to more recent times when we had a bylaw from 2018. So with the bylaw under the Freedom Camping Act, it links back to the Local Government Act. You create a bylaw, within 5 years, then you review the bylaw. 2 years after that, if you haven't reviewed within the 5 years, so 7 in total, the bylaw's gone. And so that's what's happened in our case, basically. So in November last year, the bylaw has expired. And so now we're having this conversation. So really just the message here is that we need to be considered. We need to challenge ourselves with regards to making sure that the bylaw, should you decide to have one, is the correct thing to do.
Lee, why was the bylaw not adopted in 2024?
So that was conversations around in the previous triennium, and there'll be other people around the table that will be able to speak to this more clearly than myself. My understanding is that that went through the consultation process and some great feedback from the community and discussion around the table, but around the table could not agree in relation to the adoption or not of the bylaw, and so it was put on hold with Earl's team because of the level of conversation of, I think we should not for these reasons, not dissimilar to the conversation this morning. And so all of that was paused. Myself was joined to work with Earl in relation to this conversation. Fast forward to today, basically, to say, hey, okay, there was an awful lot of great work that had been undertaken. But for me, I really just want to challenge to say, okay, what is which is the next slide, the conversation that we've been having, what is the problem that we're trying to fix? And whilst we've got an opportunity to reconsider the work that has been done, once we've got this conversation finished, we'll reflect on the work that was done previously to say, actually, we can pick this up and we can drag this across, or no, it's not appropriate, and we leave it there. But council at the time could not agree.
We couldn't get an agreement.
So that 2018 to 2023 period, was that the period that MB was co-funding some facilities? It was?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the data, like, was there less issues during that period, that 5-year period?
Yeah, it's certainly more manageable. Yeah. Because we could move them all. And fine.
Right. So that system worked quite well. So you had enforcement and you had funding.
Yes.
No, enforcement was, you'd have to say limited.
Yes.
Yeah. You had one person that went around.
We had all the one.
People out there in those
Yes,
communities.
so we had people based here, Tamara region or the Northern Territory for here. We had them based in France, Whangarei, Ross, I think, between Waitaha, Ross, and the valleys in between. We had five, and there was 2 per team, if I remember rightly, that went around and received money to do that, but they could infringe and they could move on. And they weren't generally challenged on their actual ability to move on because they didn't actually have the power to do that. But they suggested people park here rather than here.
And that bylaw that already exists is specifically reference these areas that were set up. Is it, I mean, can we see this? Maybe you're getting to that.
No, I'm not at the moment.
Can we see this old bylaw that was
I don't
adopted
think
in?
it specifically mentioned them because that happened at 2 different things. Your bylaw is one thing, and then, I mean, if you've got areas that you manage, you've got to have that included. Reference in your bylaw.
Prohibited restricted areas,
Yes.
which, to be honest, a lot of them I thought were a bit over the top, but we had on the council website where the sites were, so, and the apps that showed liaison heavily with the app organisers so that they could have up-to-date information about where the toilets, bins, sites and things were.
Seems like we've already got a bylaw and structure.
And again, but with respect, if I say this,
Yeah.
what's the problem that we're
Yeah,
trying to fix?
yeah, totally.
And to your point in relation to, okay, what does this bylaw show? Of the start of the conversation is that if you haven't got a restriction or a prohibition, it's permissive, then we don't need to show any maps. So we only show maps of where we're restricting it, of certified self-contained vehicles, for argument's sake, or it's prohibited. So for argument's sake, Sunset Point, we're going to say that's prohibited, and so we might show that in red. That's the only area that we would show, because everywhere else is permissive, you're allowed to camp there. And that's part of it, you know, trying to make it clear for the public to understand.
And legislatively, we can't put a blanket. You know, you're not allowed to camp anywhere but here.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with this is for start, it's a lot of work to put together a bylaw, but you possibly already have the framework of a bylaw, but ultimately, I'm struggling to see how the bylaw is actually going to tackle the problems that we face. It seems like.
Well, that's what,
Yeah, exactly.
Again, and I'm going to keep on saying it, there's no decisions in here today. I'm just trying to understand with my colleagues, what are the different problems that we're experiencing so that we can go away, look at the history and the experience that others have got basically, to then bring an option or 3 to you to go, okay, this is what we heard when we had the workshop. This is what we're proposing of what could be an avenue to resolve it, basically, both locally and or from a governance point of view, challenging things in Wellington to what Helen and what Stephen said earlier, basically, from that point of view. So to this, I've had a lot of conversation about this question this morning already, is what is the problem? And for what I've heard so far, to each of your different points, is whether or not this is anecdotal or evidential at this stage, is that we've got problems with waste, human waste, and with general rubbish waste from that point of view. We have got some parking issues in different locations, and particularly, as you just mentioned, in Franz Joseph for that. We have got issues in relation to the cost to our ratepayers versus business coming in. We've got an education challenge of how we're educating locally, but also visitors, 2 million visitors every year coming in, and how we're continuing to do that.
there is still environmental, issues, because you went down to Jackson's and that, Jackson Bay, and they had some concerns around, penguin habitat, right? It was getting destroyed or impacted or?
Impacted, and it had a couple of losses to the penguin population. So end of the road where there's a park below the old boat park, Craycock Park. I think it's Doc, actually, no, it might be ours. I think whose it is. There's a sign there anyway.
Yeah.
The penguins come up there. There was a guy who'd been parked there for 3 days, but he has a habit of driving into house and coming back for another 3 days. But there was a dead penguin underneath the van. So yeah, we've got people parking in areas that actually are signposted it's not for parking,
Right.
but they're parking there. And then there's the impact and the risk on the conservation side of it. Because that's a at-risk breeding colony down there as well. So the signage, it's a sign about this big,
Right.
and it's chocker full of wording that you're not going to stop and read. So I've had that conversation with Doc saying, look, we need to, if we're serious about this, we need to get signage that actually you're not going to have half an hour with your bifocals on to read.
Yes.
We need
Yeah.
signage that's succinct and clear. Do not. And then maybe just an info board, because people go around and read those on what happens there and why, as far as the breeding colonies and so forth, and why you can't park here. That you get a bit more respect. But if you've got a signage that's, you know, an A4 just chocker full of wording, they're not going to read it. And Doc agree with that. That's
Right.
the old signage, but they've got heavy work with us on that as well.
And that's right at the very end.
Yeah, when you go past, you've got the clay pot here, you've got the
Yeah.
launching ramp, and then you've got that sort of rough area here, and you've got just up from that, you've got the area that's been tidied up.
Yeah.
It's that piece off there.
Right.
It's
okay.
always been an area where people have parked and
It's
camped up.
road reserve,
Yeah.
what we call. We did organise with Tallies at least a couple of sections there for a
So where the Tallies lead is behind their hut, that's what we're talking about with the Jackson Bay project is clearing that for the boats and trailers to park in. So, and then, but as an example too, with camper vans, not just in Jackson Bay, but even the local constables want to get out to go to an incident and spend a camper van parked on this driveway. You know, that is happening a lot. That happens in Jackson's, it happens in France, people go to get out, can't, it's camper vans blocking the driveway.
That could be a parking bylaw.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
were a throwaway
Yeah.
zone,
So
something.
that's the thing, if we manage where they can park
Yeah.
and signage and it's also that ad that has been that information there, so when they do vote, that, you know, we've got something that shows up without a lot of clutter, because hell, I'm the last person that will read a whole lot of clutter about what's here or what I can and can't do. I just want to know what I can and can't and not the other stuff, so. Yeah,
That was a big thing from Southwest of his signage. If the only thing is, if we can get decent signs to let people, like Helen said, like to let people know.
Yeah.
And clear.
So where to park, or where not to park.
Yeah, freedom parking or where to park, where not to park and.
Well, we can't do that. can we?
Otago had a traffic light system where they had red, orange and green. Red, no parking for anybody. Amber was self-contained only, and green was anybody, and that was basically by toilets in a park or whatever with supposed to be there. And they just did a traffic light system which worked well.
It's easy to understand.
Yeah, but the next council took it away.
So outside of the parking that we talked about and education and litter, are there any other issues, particularly in South Westland of trans
I guess
or?
the biggest thing is when they jam themselves in there and somebody's got to get out of the park, there's no.
Well, it's the style of parking, but
Yeah.
yeah, primarily in South Westland, it's the rubbish that's left behind that the ratepayers pay for. It's the defecation, World Heritage Area. There's no way of managing that, and it's that difference between whose land is what and who's got the control over it. Because people see people park in places like the one at Haas down on the road to Jackson's, and I mean the locals took me in there to show me it's not our land. So you know, but they just figure that any land is our land unless they know it's Dock Estate. So but we've got to have that conversation with Doc. It's got to be a collective on, actually, we've got a problem collectively. How do we, like you said, bring everybody to the table and look at it and say, how do we manage this going forward?
It is, because even if I just use France as an example at the moment of obviously state highway going straight through. And so we're having the conversations with NZTA now to say, well, okay, if there is an issue that we're seeing or that we're presuming is there based on these conversations, the opportunities for delegated authority from NZTA to council to enable us to do some enforcement on state highway, basically. So that's something that we can look at and are looking at in relation to that. That might be a resolution to that issue.
But we just don't want to push them down the side, both.
No, and that's
And that's what we did last time.
That's the
Yeah.
bigger thinking in relation to
Yeah.
that, that strategic thinking or spatial planning side of things, is to go, okay, what are the unintended consequences? If this is the problem down the main high street, we push them away from there, or we have time restricted parking there. Where do they go?
Yes.
What are the opportunities that we're trying to create for them to go somewhere else, whether or not it's on council land or if it's in partnership with private companies, basically? What could that look like, basically, and how do we achieve that?
I think in the peak season, everyone would agree that everything down there is no longer fit for purpose. I went and did the Roberts Point track. We basically had to park on the berm just near the bridge to go over to Roberts Point because the car park all the way down, where they got the old glacier walk, it was backed up all the way back to there. And so with the volumes that we're seeing nowadays,
Yeah.
we need more infrastructure. So that's a dog car park, I think, isn't
Yes, it
it?
is. Yes, it is.
And they're saying that too.
Yeah.
And that is being addressed, but can we break for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, just everybody stretch their legs, get something to drink, visit out there and come back so everybody's refreshed for the next section? Is that all right?
Totally.
Lee?
15 minutes.
Yep, tops. Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay.
Sure.
Welcome back. That short intermission. So where we left the conversation was what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and from the various bits of conversation this morning is there are some parking issues. There is waste, both human waste and rubbish, if I can frame it that way. And there is education and signage that is needed. And there's the challenge then of enforcement, whether that's parking enforcement or freedom camping enforcement, et cetera, from that point of view. Just
Ecological impacts and impacts to private property
Yes.
and costs to the ratepayers. I would add those on problems.
And the other one, they just thinking about being aware of this restriction to restricting public access to beaches and things like that. I know of an example at Takatai Road where there can become issues, or has been issues in the past.
thank you.
Do we need to include the World Heritage component?
I think it's huge.
Yes, it is. It starts in Whangaroa River.
It's huge.
And so and thank you for all of that, because what we'll do after this conversation is that we're going to put our heads together, so mine and then two intelligent ones, and look at what options that there are. And what I mean by that is this next slide, is to say the issues that we've identified, whilst we might still need evidence in relation to some of those problems that we've identified, and that's an ongoing conversation from that point of view, is that these are some of the legislation that might be an option to resolve those issues, basically. And so the Freedom Camping Act is the one that we've been talking about. The Land Transport Act, so that comes back to the parking side of things, basically, and our ability to enforce parking rules that might alleviate one or more of the problems that we've identified. The Reserves Act is in there as well. And so the Reserves Act had an amendment, I think it was about 12 months ago now, whereby through our reserve management plans, if we've already identified that camping is not permitted on there, you can now infringe under the Reserves Act, which is actually $800 versus freedom camping, which is $400. And so depending on, again, what the issue is and where the issues are, we have different legislation that might be more appropriate to address the problem versus just as a default going to the Freedom Camping Act from that point of view. In addition to that, the RMA that I talked about at the very beginning of the conversation, the two bills that is part of that reform, one of the bills is the planning bill that will ultimately become the Planning Act, looks about regional spatial planning. And so some of the problems that we're talking about, it might be more appropriate if it was picked up in a spatial planning, which is a much bigger piece of work from that point of view. And that's not just looking at camping, but parking, where we have buildings, residential, commercial, industrial, et cetera, et cetera. I guess just the message is that there are multiple ways of addressing issues. We just need to understand what the issues are, and for us not just to default to one line, in this case, the Freedom Camping Act. Okay. This next one, the intention for this is to say, well, okay, if we were to allow camping, do you have ideas as to where that camping should occur? We talked about the no and some of the problems this morning, but are there locations that you've got in your mind whereby you think actually as a hub that we might be able to allow camping, either something that council is developing or encouraging, or for commercial entity to step into that space for them to do that? Is there any locations up and down our coast where you think actually it's okay there?
You agree? Right. I'd like to see the site just out where the rugby ground is. The council's got quite a bit of land there between there and the sewage ponds. Maybe look at something like that because it is close to town and it would be easier to service. Yeah, and maybe other reserve land that council has somewhere else that's in an appropriate position where they are reasonably close to town but not in town or in built-up areas. I don't know if there's anywhere down at Harry or something like that, but the hotel seems to contain that down there, doesn't it? So
Yeah, and he's quite keen to expand on that and try and broaden that. I was talking about it on Saturday.
Yeah, I was just wondering too that those commercial sites do help take the pressure off. If they could possibly get some sort of relief, especially if they've got extra rates on toilet pans and stuff like that, that they can get, you know, I don't know about the Woodstock, they would have their own sewage system there, I'd imagine. But maybe the Canary Hotel, they might be able to fit 4 or 5 campers in there, things like that. Maybe if we could look at something like that to alleviate the problem.
What sort of relief are you talking about, Dave?
What's that?
What sort of relief?
Or something like say for example, Canary Hotel where they have to pay $550 per pan on their rates. You know, if they could be given some relief. In any other sort of site, maybe like Otera or something like that, but if they're already doing that and they're charging for it, maybe not. But, you know, just something to have a look at, because I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it could be just some way of,
Okay.
you know.
I think we need to look at the whole corridor, but at the beginning, our welcome mat is Kumara. And the race course is only used like once a year, but it must have toilet facilities for a mass event because they hold the races there. So we should probably be approaching them and seeing, you know, could people use their car park and their toilets and they charge some nominal amount. And maybe they contact Vern to discuss how it worked with that previous setup that he administers. And similar things that we already talked about, Scenic Hotels, former site in France. There must be other opportunities past. Down there, I don't know much about that area, but
Well, there is, it's that gravel patch where at Doggo, because the house community are quite keen to do something with it, because it's quite a big site once you get in there, but the gravel piles. They're quite keen, but there's no toilet facility in the collection, but they're quite keen to, because that's where people go to. You know, going down, you've got the straight, you've got the post shop used to be, and you've got that motel there. Just across the road from that, there's an access that takes you into the beach. And there's an old gravel pit, the airport.
It's like a real reservoir, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, it's a reservoir, and you've got, we do the way through, but it's quite a large site in there. And they're quite keen, because that's where people go to, because then they can just walk onto the beach. So the community spoke to us when we were down there about opening that up.
That's where we drove through.
Yeah,
places where there's already infrastructure for, because it's mostly.
it's got no infrastructure, but it's a site that could have infrastructure. Yeah.
Just remember that, yeah, it might be nicer, but it's expensive. Remember, it's really expensive.
And the ratepayers have to pay.
Yeah.
So as far as the pan tax goes, potentially the biggest problem with that, Greg, is that you've got your public usage versus your camper van, which is your campus, which is an absolute minority compared to the other. So I don't think that's going to be able to be achieved through that, because the problem we'll have with that would be a can of worms, everybody will want to do that. So we've got to sort of think, yes, it's an idea, but then, you know, the pros and cons, let's focus on what we can do. Because like Earl said, like for the asset, to put the infrastructure and the cost of that is huge, and then the maintenance of it is huge. So unless it can be done through the community, because I know what you're saying, if the community have got management and control and they can get the money back, that can feed back into the maintenance of that, that's a perfect situation to have. But can we do that? Can we create that? What's involved to get us to that point? I don't know. It's just, we've got to do that tune, don't we, to have a look at what's doable.
If most like when you do for a family, it is on a low budget, if none.
Yes.
That's what we're dealing with. You know, that's the bottom line. There's people out there to enjoy the beautiful country and don't want to pay for accommodation because technically they have it all on board. Whether they use it, that's the problem. But yeah, they don't want to be going and paying to stay somewhere. They might as well go and pay campground when they get all the facilities. So yeah, that's something that comes up in France quite a bit. They know that they are trying to do it as cheap as they can.
Yeah.
And
They're also the people that will sneak into certified campgrounds at night time and use their washing machines and their showers without having to pay. And that is something that happens here and all the way south and around the South Island. And also the ones that will go to the public toilets and use the basin then to clean their teeth and wash their smalls and everything else. So that's what we're primarily dealing with a lot of the time.
Is there a laundromat in France?
yes, around the back,
Yeah.
by the dock.
Mm.
Yeah, Yeah.
Again, it's education and everything else.
Or preparedness to pay, and that's, I think, the biggest thing we've got, is that they're not prepared to pay, because Donkey's got a laundromat at his one. He does the kayaks and the boats on the lake. He's got a laundromat now on his site.
You're not reason.
Eh?
You're not reason.
No, in France.
Oh,
And, if they can use it at night time when there's nobody around for nothing, they'll try. So he's got a lock mechanism now where you've got to have a swipe to do it, to manage it.
But yeah, with freedom camping is they want to do it on the lowest budget possible, and they're the people that. Yeah,
If that doesn't mean so, they're not spending a lot of money on other stuff.
absolutely, absolutely.
They'll do all the thrill-seeking stuff, the stuff that they want to experience, but not anything
They're
else.
not cheap activities, they're doing $400 a day.
I know.
Paragliding.
But that's where their money goes, not
Yeah.
onto,
Yeah.
they're the ones that will sit outside their camper vans in the morning and cook up some noodles for breakfast,
Yeah.
Yeah,
because that's primarily what they
I
buy,
mean,
you know?
I motor camps on a motorbike through America. So I know exactly what's involved in all this, and they've got some quite strict rules. But right at the end of my trip, I only found out through happenstance that there's all these trucky service centres where these big rigs go in. They've got showers and everything for the drivers and whatnot. Should we be trying to partner up with the service stations? Because these Freedom Campers, they all need to get fuel. And there might be an angle for Brian in Harry, the BP here or whatever, to install a shower and publicize that for people moving through the district that are trying to be self-sufficient. And then it, again, as Stephen said, it's not our problem, but we're trying to create a solution, and encourage business activity as well.
I would have thought a good start would be just to print a map of the entire district, pinpoint where we already have these private enterprises alleviating the problem a little bit, and then just look at where the big gaps are, and then we start talking to people who know those areas well, saying, hey, is there anywhere in this gap on the map where you think council could, set something up? And as far as showers go, I don't know why we don't promote pool more for Freedom Campers to shower. There's a revenue stream. You can pay $5, I think, to go in there and have a shower. Is it advertised out?
No, because it's not what we want to be doing.
Oh, but that's what they offer that as a package. Like you go in there and they have a fee to use the shower.
Yeah, you can, but it's,
quite a lot that we get.
Yeah.
yeah.
We're putting you,
Well, I mean,
we need revenue in that pool.
yeah, I know, but we've also got to, you've got to have the means to keep an eye on that, as far as having young kids in changing rooms, et cetera, et cetera. So, it comes down to numbers, the staff there are to manage people using the pool, primarily not those.
Yeah, but it's obviously something that's been discussed because they
Yeah,
offer it
yeah.
as a service.
Yes, it is a service.
We did put in I wrote a funding project with Indy to get that done as a drop-in thing, to go and do their laundry and clean and have a share and what have you. But then when, who was it last year? Was it
The Kiwi Camp,
the Kiwi Camp?
Yeah.
When they put that proposal and we walked off and abandoned the ideas.
But yeah, I'd like to see that map, and maybe we could just, because there probably is already quite a few strategic locations. Like you got Kumara, we've got
Woodstock.
Woodstock, exactly.
Bear Creek Road.
Yeah.
Domain.
I'm a bit ignorant really south of Hoki what facilities are available. There must be some big gaps where a lot of these issues are occurring.
Baringa was kind of
Yeah.
the stop there and we had nothing really south of there.
Is it possible?
Has Harry got a shower in their toilet block there?
I don't think so.
no, that's
No, just toilet.
Yeah, is it possible to get metrics off that camp across the road as to how much it's used or whatever? I understand that.
Francois would get it for us.
Yeah, because that's useful information to know, how prevalent the problem is, or, how many people need showers and things like that. I understood they were closing it down, but.
See, Wateroa is a place where they use their initiative and they've opened up the golf course, the domain there, because there's showers and toilets there. And they've got rubbish receptacles there, which, they've taken that on the chin to manage. So they're welcoming self-contained primarily, but they do have non-self-contained parking there. And they clean the toilets and do the showers, and they charge a small fee to those people. But if they get a bit ratty and aren't prepared to pay, they don't push the barrier.
Yeah.
But that's actually working really well for them. They've got a lot more control than what they have on the problem. When they go out and look at those pressure points where they used to go and camp in the dodgy areas, there's less in those numbers of more parking there, but it's more particularly your self-contained responsible campers that parking there. But they are seeing a growth in the other ones. So
Right.
there is the ability, and the Harry Hay pubs, he's another site where he's prepared to grow that, new in there. He's got the campground there and they've got facilities in the pub, but it's him being prepared to leave things open at night for people to come in and use. But he's a conversation that's prepared to be had.
Yeah, there's no toilets outside, you should come into his building,
Yes,
which
yes,
is.
but that's a conversation he's having, having to have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask, what are the other councils doing up the coast? Have you spoken to them?
I haven't spoken to them at the moment. So I've been looking on their website, and as you drive down, they've got signage, some signage are just in relation to responsible camping. Same as what QLDC is coming through from the south. But I wanted to have this conversation first of all, to gauge where are we at, and then look at what does that look like, so that we then got up and down the coast basically.
Grey don't primarily have a problem because that's a small area, and they've given a site that you can park down at
Breakwater somewhere.
yes, on the Cobden side. You do get people parking on the Blaketown side, but that's and they go under the bridge.
But they go right into Springs Junction as well, so
Who? Grey? No, they don't.
Grey District.
No, they don't. That's Cobden. Grey doesn't go there. Grey's got a very small boundary. No, that's Buller. That's Buller. Grey's very small.
Oh,
In
okay.
that respect. So Buller have got signage, so they've got self-contained only. They started with those signs years ago. Yes, welcome self-contained. They have commanded or they've ambassaded at this time, so they've gone around and told people to move, but they've just moved from here to there. But again, their tourism market isn't the same as ours. It's growing and their problem's growing, but we have a far greater tourism market and movement than those two places. So we're actually comparable to the Queenstown Lakes and Mackenzie Country and Central Otago as far as the level of our problems and movement of people.
Okay. Next slide. Okay. So just wanted to give a bit of context in relation to, if we were to have a bylaw and some of the challenges that go with that. So the resourcing is the first and foremost for the time it takes to not just doing the bylaw, that's relatively straightforward. I say relatively, it's the implementation of it. And so the fact that, okay, once we've got the bylaw in place, then we want to be infringing. So having those infringement books, or if it's digital, but from that point of view, system behind the scenes, basically. So that then you've got the infringement, you get the reminder notice, a bit like your parking ticket, if you ever have a parking ticket. And then the fact that we send it off to court. The challenge with that is that if you haven't got a Kiwi address, it is unlikely the courts are going to allow you to lodge that infringement with them to chase you for that infringement. It costs you as council $55 every time we lodge an infringement with the courts.
Excluding staff.
Exclude that. That's literally just the fee to lodge it with the courts. So a $400 infringement, we lodge that with the courts. It costs an additional $55, and then the courts, hypothetically speaking, would chase the individual down. They would get the infringement paid, and then we would get our money back, and the courts take a small percentage in relation to that fee. So the $55, they would get that off the individual, basically, so we would get that money back. But there's a time lag with all of this as well. Just because it gets sent to court, a bit like parking infringements, we don't get the money back straight away. So that might be an investment in officer time, but you might not see for a couple of years, and that lags. As I say, if you're an overseas visitor, there is a challenge that we will not be able to get that money back. Now, the Act allows a rental company to charge the credit card of that hirer so that you could get the money back. What rental companies tend to do is to leave it to you as council for that privilege, because they don't want to leave a sour taste in their customer's mouth by the fact that you've travelled around New Zealand and you've got a freedom camping ticket in Westland and Central Otago and Queenstown Lakes, etc., etc. And so they're going to charge $400 each time for that. They leave it to the councils to chase, and we ain't going to chase it because we can't. So that's the difficulty that we've got, and ideally there would be a change in legislation to require the hire company to do that. So it's not our responsibility. So it's less intrusive to us to have to enforce that. Because that's what takes the time in chasing the infringements, basically, to try and get the money back from the money that you've spent of having an individual to enforce it. We are trying to get a contractor to see if we can get some idea of if we were to have to enforce freedom camping, could we get someone to do that? What would that look like? We're finding that challenging at the moment from that point of view. If it was going to be staff, this is not in the picture with regards to the current staff, what their roles are, and it's not in the current FTE counts. And so this would have to be an additional resource that we would need to have to be able to enforce that. Would that be fair to say? So there's challenges there with regards to the resource side of things. The infringements, yes, we've talked about infringements. It's $400. It was $250. It's now gone up to $400 for each infringement. The Reserves Act is $800. So there is options in relation to what we could use to gather to make enforcement cost neutral, I guess, to our ratepayers. Parking is variable. If you're looking at parking enforcement, those infringements are set in statute, and they range from roughly $20 for being sort of half an hour overtime and parking to parking in a disability parking space of $750, and that's set in statute. But again, depending on what the problem is, we may be able to use different pieces of legislation. And anything, whenever I look at this, I try and make it cost neutral to the ratepayers, but it's for us to fully understand the gravity of the problem. And if the problem is, and we don't have the evidence of a problem today, then we'll put in a watching brief for that, so we gather the evidence so that we can enforce it tomorrow. And then education is a key part. That is an ongoing challenge in relation to freedom camping, as we were talking earlier, because you're having to re-educate people every single day, because the tourist today is not the tourist of tomorrow. And so how do we do that consistently as a staff island, as well as for ourselves, basically, are they visited wherever they're coming, domestic or international, but they understand what the rules are, and having simple rules. You know, the traffic light system that Helen was talking about earlier is a simple process for that. But it's only simple if we explain that in the beginning somehow, so that when people are traveling around, they understand, right, we've got red, amber and green. We know what we can and can't do from that point of view.
And the same applies to the chair for signage. That you can say put signage up. You can have over signage. You can have, you've got to have something that's legally defendable if it relates to legal issues. And they're not cheap as well. Put in, you know, a sign's $600-700. Trying to get someone to put it, they're going to dig a post in. No, it's not.
As far as, cost neutral, like it's funny because you educate people because you want them to stop the activity, but then the only revenue is if you're busting people doing the activity that you're trying to stop. So it just doesn't really add up to me, but.
It's insightful because, you know, the people that you've educated today, locals, yes, whether that's parking or freedom camping from that point of view, within reason, I say yes. The visitors might understand today what our rules are, but then they go down the road. Are the rules the same?
Yeah, exactly.
No, they're not the same. The premise is the same, but the rules are not necessarily the same. So that's an ongoing challenge, which is why that bigger picture that we were talking about, the work that Helen's doing with Mackenzie and with Queenstown Lakes.
I haven't tried to believe that it's only just finalised it.
Is trying to get a level of consistency and understanding as to, so that visitors coming through, it is the same.
Yeah.
They do understand. That's a bigger piece, and it's going to take longer for us to get to that situation and that solution from that point.
What's the feasibility of, you know, getting all the South Island councils together on this? Because we're only as strong as our weakest link, right? And so if we're doing a bit of work on spatial planning and how to, the issues for us won't be too dissimilar to all the other councils, let's face it. So, you know, there's no point of us having some kind of bylaw an enforcement or infringement, and then they get through and, you know, it's not enforced anywhere else. But if we're all together on the same issue, then the education becomes easier because it's the same everywhere. So, how do we get onto that?
Did you ever share the difference between Buller or Grey or Western?
Yeah. So it's more of a macro issue than a micro issue.
Why not?
Okay, so just on that bingo, it's something that I've been considering for some time and having disjointed conversations with my counterparts, Queenstown Lakes, Mackenzie Country, etc. Kaikoura, Taupo, Rotorua, everywhere else in between that actually have the problems and the tourism industry. So with that, I've also spoke to the Minister's office and her team, very supportive of the idea. So when I was at conference last week, I spoke to the Mayor of Queenstown Lakes and his 2IC, spoke to Mackenzie Country and Central Otago. And so the four of us are going to lead a working group to represent the South Island and talking to the other mayors of other tourist places like Kaikoura. We will confer with them. They're going to feed in their issues, their perceptions. We're going to feed in. We're meeting next week on Zoom. So we're going to bring them in, but we're going to have four at the table because the idea is that we have one bylaw for the South Island. Because let's face it, tourists don't know when they've driven from Haranui to Kaikoura or from Grey to Westland. So the other thing is two pieces of legislation that govern freedom camping as well. So it's got to work in with that. So if there's the changes to be done with that, we will feed into that legislative change back to the Minister. So we're going to build up the framework for the bylaw for the South Island. So that is manageable. Then it will go to North Island, to the likes of Rotorua, Taupo, those key places, Northland, that have those same sort of tourism problems or impacts that we have. And if it works for them, it could roll out New Zealand wide. So the government also understands, the Minister understands the green sticker situation they've got when the government brought that in. It was supposed to be that it was foolproof, and they have accepted that it's not. New Zealand have accepted, unfortunately, that's a different conversation. So it's a big step in for what we've had because are we going to get there in time for this end of year tourist season? We hope so. But the legislation might be through because, of course, government shuts down for the elections. But the Minister's office can carry on quite an element of that work through that election period without creating the bylaw, but not touching on the legislation to have the new government in place. But yes, because that's something that I've thought for a long time. Why the hell are we all kicking our own cans around the road?
Yeah.
You know, we should be doing this collectively together. So one rule for the whole South Island. So we're taking that to the Minister. We've now got the go-ahead for that and so pulled the working group together. And we had our first meeting at the conference on day 2, and we start off having a link up next week.
Is the Minister receptive, do you think, as an interim step to reinstate funding in some way?
There's no money at the moment. It would have to come out of the IVL, and there is no money in there either.
For fist by the petrol prices and tax and stuff. So, I mean, they must be able to find.
We're not going to get money for this at this stage unless we put forward a proposition to them. We've got to put forward a proposition for them to consider, because if we can, by saying this would actually fund this, which would enable that, then they will look at it. But there's no way we'll get any funding without something like that. But also we're saying that that can fund that, which means we can manage this. We've got to show what the benefits and gains would be out of that for them to even consider it.
Yeah. So could we, Your Worship, put forward a proposal to say, look, we're the test beds, give us the money, let's roll it out here. If it works, you've got the buy-in from Queenstown Lakes, Mackenzie and Taupo, whatever, to then roll it out nationwide or even just South Island wide.
Well, we know the funding
If we put
works.
ourselves forward as the
Guinea pigs.
leader.
Yeah. We are, because I've taken the lead with putting it together, but we know the funding works because the funding we had last time worked as far as the restrictions we had. We didn't have a lot, but we actually were enabled to manage the problem. I would say reasonably well. Would you say reasonably is probably the apt word there, Vern?
Yeah.
You know, there was things we found could have been done better, or if we'd had a little bit more control, we could have done, say, differently. But that's something that can feature in the paper too, and that's something that the other councils are going to be writing into because we all had the funding. So they're looking at what enabled them to do, what the changes were, what the behavioural changes were, and where the gains fed through. And then over what period of time when the funding went, did we see those things fall back? So there's a lot of work going into it, a lot of background.
There is, and it's all good stuff, but I think you've mentioned this before in other meetings, we're the smallest ratepayer base in the country, but one of the largest geographical areas, so you know, we need to back ourselves. You constantly say that. So let's put ourselves forward and say, look, we need the money more than anyone else. Yes, you might want that funding that you used to have, but we need it first.
Yep,
And that's what I think we should be acting as lobbyists and just trying to reinstate something while Lee and his team is working on these things for us to consider.
We'll get funding this season on, and look, they all can afford to fund ambassadors, which they all have done this last season. And the season before, they've had ambassadors out there. So that's not putting fines out. That's actually saying, look, you can't park here. You need to go here, because nobody's got the actual background to be able to enforce anything at the moment. So that's what they've had, and they can afford to subsidise that with their ratepayers and their profit. They know that we're not the smallest ratepaying base in the country, but we're one of the smaller ones. So, and they're well aware of that too. So, you know, that could be something that they would consider, allowing us to perhaps trial it again. But that's a conversation I'll have to have with them. But I'm right out there for putting things forward as far as our own backyard.
Hearing this sort of makes me think about what Stephen said earlier, like, I like your initiative, Jack, you know, it's a positive step. If you could get the South Island to agree on some rules, and then talk to your counterparts in the North Island, then maybe at that point, you put the onus back on central government and you say, look, we're all on the same page here. You need to change the national legislation here around freedom camping, as opposed to a bylaw. Like,
But this is what it does. We've got to do the bylaw.
Yes, and I'm agreeing with your process, but
Yeah.
it might end up just going back on Wellington to be like, hey, look, we're all on the same page here. We need to update this law.
So that's what the whole plan is, and the minister's agreed to that. She's acknowledged it needs to be changed and updated.
Yeah.
But we've got to do this work first to take to them, and then they look at that and say, how does that impact the legislation? What has to be changed there? But of course, they shut down in May, they shut down 1st of July, I think it is, for the elections. So
Yeah.
we're not going to get through, but if we can get, she will enable the bylaw to carry on its pathway through the department, because they will enable that.
We'll come up with bespoke solutions for our district in the meantime, but in the background, this bigger piece of work is going.
Yes, but it means that we've got an end result that's achievable, that's doable, that will actually give us the backbone that we desire to have. So
that leads me on to this slide. Thank you. And again, this is no decisions here today, but this is one of the options of the conversation that we've had, is that we'll go away and look at some potential options for solutions for the issues that have been discussed, and then bring a report back to yourselves, I'm saying roughly July, basically, because we will need to think about actually how could we potentially resolve some of the issues that have been raised. And then in the meantime, then there's kind of a watching brief, work's happening in the background, and then to come back and update council, because we then would have had the elections. We'll have a bit more of an understanding of where do things lie, what is the government, whoever that government will be at the time, and where are they seeing the priorities in the first 100 days, for argument's sake, and what are the progress that has been made from a South Island point of view or not. Has the options that we've put forward for some of the more bespoke issues that we're dealing with, have those been alleviated, yes or no? Are we able to gather some more information or evidence for some of the other issues that have been raised this morning to inform a further decision, basically, whether that's a bylaw or not? The other option is, no, we think that we need to press on with our local bylaw. Of what could that look like? And there's just a very brief outline. That would be tight, to be honest. It's not impossible, but it would be tight. The significant risk with pushing ahead with it would be litigation, or being challenged because we haven't got sufficient evidence to justify the limitations that we're putting on to restrict or prohibit camping. In addition to that, it's the work that we were talking about earlier, the work that's involved for us to deliver that, and the enforcement of that moving forward. And the enforcement is the biggest challenge, basically, because of the size of our district. But it's just to put that out there, so you've got, you know, a bit of an understanding of the timelines of it would be short. But either way, we will bring a report back to yourselves because you're going to need to make a decision on this as to what we do or don't do at this stage. But we'll put some thought into the conversation this morning, which has been really helpful for my benefit. And there are areas that I want to come down and have a look at for myself. We were talking earlier, you know, and to come and see, well, okay, get a bit more of an understanding of what is that parking issue. And then we can have conversations as to what we can and can't do in that space, or timings in relation to linking in with the NZTA as to what that looks like. And those conversations have already started, are happening behind the scenes. By Earl's team 6 or 12 months ago, even, because it takes time for that wheel to turn. But that conversation is definitely happening as well.
Through the chair, what you also have to remember is last time when we came back through this was councillors that the reason we couldn't get a bylaw was because the councillors couldn't agree on the way forward. So we're sort of trotting, we're going around in circles where we can't deliver what you might want to, because A, we haven't got enough evidence apart from anecdotal, and B, we couldn't get agreement within council to actually push something forward.
That's pretty much us for this morning then, unless there's any further questions.
Ideas? Like I got some ideas. So how do you want to hear them now? Or should I type something up and send it to you? Or?
If you could type it up, Joseph, that would be really helpful, and flick that to me. And some of the conversations that have taken place, so I've already linked in Janella to sort of go, hey, I want to get a bit more of an understanding of France and what that's looking like, so that we can then put our ideas together to go, this could be a potential option, and then bring that back to you as council to say, hey, yeah, we like this bit, we don't like that bit, whatever your decisions are, basically in relation to pausing with a local bylaw because of the work that's happening, because of the evidence that we do or don't have, but looking at how we can resolve some of these other issues in relation to, a waste strategy, for argument's sake, or not, as the case may be. And at the moment, that you've raised quite a lot this morning that my head's coming up with different solutions, but I want to sense check that with the intelligent people around the table.
So, asking for evidence, what sort of evidence are you looking for? So if I went back to the Friends or down to Cape Patai or whatever and said, hey, look, council, we need some evidence to back up what you're telling me. What is it? They're going to say, well, what do you want?
Service request. Call on the service request.
Right, okay.
That's basically it. It's raising the service request. If you've got photographs, if you've got videos, giving that information, because picture tells 1,000 words, right? It's showing that, but showing that on a regular basis. So if we suddenly get inundated, so you go back and talk to your community, we get 400 come through, but then we get nothing for the next 6 months. Okay, has the problem gone away, or is it that the community thinks that they've done enough?
That's my experience.
Or not? It's often in Vern's world as well, from a noise complaint, we get similar thing. Oh, this issue's going on, it's constant. Is it? Okay, so we go out to deal with the noise complaint. It's not constant, it's intermittent. That doesn't mean there's not still a problem, it's just a different type of problem, and how do we address that? But often people just throw a whole heap of things at council and say, here's the problem, and then it stops. That doesn't help.
Because obviously we've got Whitebank coming up, there's a lot of freedom parking around, camping and stuff with Whitebank and stuff. So obviously that's going to be really busy.
Yes.
But then it's gone again.
To be honest, a lot of those are self-contained and they are quite responsible. But the freedom camping issue that we have certainly is seasonal, because it normally starts in November. This year it started in October. It's winding down now, but we still have them around, and the bookings are still going to be into May. Although there has been cancellations coming forward into May, affected primarily, I guess, by the fuel.
Well, it's using the systems we've got there already, as also there's the service request system of community using that, putting in the complaints through that system. Basically.
And this is, Snaps and Solve.
That's probably the most efficient way to get stuff to you, because they can just do it instantly. Right?
And it's got everything on it. It's got the date, the time, the whole lot.
It does. I guess some of the challenge might be the location. It's not always obvious where that problem is.
GPS
location does.
When I've used it, it's told me where I was and it asked to confirm. They must have some GPS built into it or something.
Yeah, I had to look into it. We've only got a very light version of that.
Okay.
feature, so-
Pretty sure it's got like a
I'm
GPS.
going to look, we'll see what we've got.
See us out there with the compass.
Yeah.
It's not here somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm quite,
Takes a
I'm
bit
quite
to-
optimistic that we can come up with solutions to the problems that are facing us while this bigger work is going on in the background. I think we could have solutions in place by possibly next season. I mean, that might be a bit tight, might be the season after, but I see a way forward. Not drastic solutions. I'm not talking about building a massive infrastructure, but you know, I think I can see quite easy to implement solutions. Might cost some money, so then funding comes into it.
And that's the
Yeah.
part of it that we also need to appreciate is that we can think about solutions, but there's probably going to be a price tag that comes to it. And that's your decision. in
Rolling
relation to
paid
that.
parking ASAP to pay for it.
Which is a different problem.
Totally.
But it's not to say that that conversation
Yeah.
shouldn't happen as well, basically. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's also important, Lee, that when you analyze the problems and you found some potential solutions, I think the council needs to know the timeline. Is this what we're going to fix? Is this for 5 years? Is it going to be for 10? Or are we going to have to review it, you know, because tourism changes or, I don't know, tourism gets cut off by Trump? So yeah, the timeline of would be useful. I know you said previously on another bylaw, they expire after a certain time, don't they?
So they expire after 5 years, but you can change, you can amend the bylaw at any point in time. And so as things do change, we just bring that to you. Or if you're seeing or hearing things, you're raising that with us as staff for us to look into it, to go, yeah, actually, it's a fair point. We need to bring this back to you. That might be after 3 years, not 5 years. Absolutely.
Could you send us the old bylaw?
Look at it. 2018. Yeah. No problem at all.
Definitely. So there's a lot of work done to that.
No problem at all. Awesome. Thank you all very much indeed. You will hear from us very soon with a council report to make some decisions basically, but we'll go away for the remainder of this month and a little bit of next month. So either June or July, we'll bring a report back to you for some decisions basically.
How are we going to get the word out to the community that we need?
Evidence.
Yeah.
Was just about to ask Earl, Vern, when we had those teams out there monitoring and managing, did we get a report back from each one of them for that season? Because that would be the information we need historically, because not a lot has changed since then.
There was conditional on funding from MB.
Yeah.
The next tranche didn't come out until there was a report.
Yeah.
I think it was
So it's-
3 reports per project.
Yeah, so it'd be good to bring that information in, because that cited the problems where they were, et cetera. So there's a bit of information we can capture from that, because some of that, there's a lot of that hasn't changed.
I mean, the main thing is to make it evidence-based rather than, oh, somebody's gone to the toilet in the bushes. I mean, how do you know who did that? It could be a dock worker, it could be a possum trapper, it could be somebody driving past. Everybody blames it on Freedom Camp.
Yeah.
And
And with the volume that's there, come on, let's take it up this. Really.
That's the whole thing, though. You've got to make sure it's not anecdotal.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, go down and you walk those areas and you'll see it's not
I've
advertised.
seen it, I've seen it, but we've got to make sure that it's fact-based.
Yes.
You can try and.
I don't want to get, 4 million snaps in sold saying so much crap.
No, it's pretty bloody disgusting, because you won't find one there and nothing anywhere else that you'll find it.
But to Helen's point, like, there's a balance there between evidence-based and a bit of common sense as well.
It is. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting point that Councillor Mackenzie made, that the whole thing was funded, there was 40 million bucks funded from the entry levy at the gate, the international visitors. 20 million went to DOC, and then there was contestable funding for us to apply for the other 20 million, and we did very well out of it because, and they acknowledged that we had a small ratepayer base and a huge amount of tourists coming through. Now they're charging $100 at the gate, and we get nothing.
Yeah.
There's a potential funding stream for, if we can come up with a concise plan and then approach, say, hey, we need this budget for this, using the arguments that you had laid out, of being small rate base, lots of tourists, there might be a stream, an avenue there. Yeah.
There's potential.
Yeah, attention.
But it's You know how the way the government is at the
Yeah,
moment. they
yeah,
don't like
totally.
spending it,
Yeah.
so,
No, I get it.
Yeah, but they also have to listen to the,
Yeah.
the voters. And yes, they've got their own agenda about saving money, reducing cost of living, but
Yes.
reducing cost of living also is things like this that cost us to remediate the waste management. It's not all just the cost of beef, mince at the supermarket or milk. It's the peripheral costs to us as people living in New Zealand.
Collection of waste is core business.
Yeah, so we have to put a business case to them, regardless of who's in government in October or November or whatever, and say, look, this needs reinstated in some way. You know, you're charging more, as Vern said. We need that funding because we have no other revenue stream to cover the cost of this.
We need a plan.
Yeah, we need to lobby harder, I think. South Island White, Helen's doing a good job to start that. But I think all the mayors need to nut heads together and just go to Wellington and say, this is the story.
Can't all go to Wellington. This is what we're doing though, this is what we're doing, we're looking at. There's no point going to say we've got a problem.
Why don't you protest in Wellington?
You can, but what I'm saying is that if you go to Wellington and say that we've got a problem, you need to fix it, they'll say the war's over there.
But
You've got to go with what the
solution,
problem is
yeah.
and the solution and how we're going to do that and what part we're going to play in it. It's not just asking for them to resolve it and you need to throw money at it. We've got to have what we are prepared to do to make that work. Then they'll sit up and listen.
But we have the evidence of a solution. It was working according to.
Well, it was a problem when they implemented the funding streams and then COVID came along, they cut it.
Yes.
But tourism numbers are back to pre-COVID, so the
Yeah.
problem's still, problem is still there.
So if we just go back with that, they'll say that we know that.
There's an opportunity to create nationwide a world-class network for freedom campers.
Yeah.
You tie in, Tourism New Zealand and everyone into it. Air New Zealand, they get the information on their way over. I mean, there's a real opportunity here, way down the road, everybody to actually set up a really good network.
Totally.
You know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, so we're going out to, who's doing that? Queenstown. So they're working with all the rental companies with the vehicles, getting data from them. So we're all got sort of things to manage within what we're putting together as well. So that we've got everybody at the table that needs to be at the table. So that's a big help as well.
We can come up with a solution for Westland, the idea that everyone agrees on, give it to you to go and then pitch to your counterparts. Could be a good tool for you.
Well, yeah, but it's not, I mean, what's
Westland's
going to
ideas.
work here has also got to work everywhere else. So
Yeah,
everybody's got our problems.
Keep
plus
it
some.
very simple.
Yeah,
But Greg's idea about the bin bags that he experienced in Gisborne, I remember before they had wheelie bins in Upper Hutt, we had to buy bin bags at New World
Yeah.
for the council.
that's right.
You know, and so there's no reason why we couldn't have pink bin bags that they buy, because they're gonna buy their food somewhere as they're
Yeah.
traveling. And then they get a trifold flyer as to where they can dump them
Exactly.
and so on. So that's education
That's a
part,
good one.
but it
That's a good one.
That was-
Greg's idea or
Yeah.
Gisborne's council's idea.
Yeah.
No, we'll take it.
Yeah,
It's a really good idea, because it would work. Everybody goes to the supermarket to buy food.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's
That's a
gonna
very
be
good
part of
idea.
my pitch to you guys was on the, wherever maybe we have those entryway points where we educate them on that. Hey, we have this waste system. And maybe you can even buy it at the kiosk. The QR of your, tap your credit card, I'm sorry, the thing, but you need to have
our key
information.
stakeholders are the supermarkets and the petrol stations. If we can get them on board throughout Westland,
Where to sleep, where to
then
put your
that's how we
waste,
educate
where the
people.
toilets are.
So you can get the yellow bags downstairs for $2.50 or $2.50, the little yellow ones.
Yeah.
So I've just bought a heap for the shop down there because there's nothing down there for our locals. So that's what
They need to know where to dump them at the end of their
Yes.
time.
Yes, they do need to know.
That's the issue.
Yes, the big thing.
Because everywhere apart from here, it's only open a couple of hours a week.
It's gonna be super simple, like, the best solutions are usually quite simple.
Nationwide, yeah, you're right.
Well, I think it's really important that we do have a joint council proposition that goes to government, that within that there is legislation that protects the rights of New Zealand to access our hunting sites and our fishing sites. And whether or not we use that by having a little card that shows that we're a ratepayer or a resident in Westland or Gisborne or wherever, So I think when you look at, for example, suicide statistics in New Zealand and the statistics on young people that just don't get out in the environment anymore, I think this is a really serious issue that also costs us and to the whole country. And so I think that a component must be in a proposal like that takes care of that issue.
It enables us to still use our backyard. So I've been pinged by NZMCA for passing a comment here at council where I said what I had seen, which is the duplication of the green stickers to one number will do a multitude of vehicles, and they'd holding me to task for that. But it's been interesting because I've since been contacted by a lot of their members saying, actually, I'm correct. So don't back down. And that is the problem. You know, the government created the problem with these green stickers because it's on their front windscreen. It doesn't matter what's on the back. It's a front windscreen, just like your red Joas. There's a wee card there in a plastic folder that shows a registered number from the Gas Fitters Association, which means the vehicle's certified for wastewater. And if you look on the right-hand side, which is where the tanks are, there's no cat there. There is no wastewater system there. So the government said this was foolproof, and it's not. We've found that. And that is the problem. The biggest concern a lot of the NZMCA members are telling me they have is that we'll be forced into having a blanket ban on areas throughout the country for anybody, which is not what we want. And it sure as hell isn't what they want. But they can see that if something's not done, that is the ultimate way of managing it, because then it is able to be policed and controlled. And they know that's not what we want to see. It's not what Queenstown or anybody else wants to see as well. So they're quite prepared to come to the table and be part of the discussion as members of NZTA, not management, because they know what we're saying. They see the issues and they agree with them. So we've got the members are now going to start telling the management, hang on a moment, don't start threatening taking them to court. We want to work with them so that we are all enabled to use and have our backyard available to us.
To be fair to the NZMCA, I've worked alongside with them in partnership, so to speak, previously in previous lives, and you know they have some 100,000 members. They are, you know, they manage their membership very, very well. They advocate very well for their members, you know, to have that right to go and travel around New Zealand, basically, and sites that their members camp in are managed very, very well. And so conversations that I've had in the past with them, this is what we're thinking from a restriction point of view. It is useful to work alongside, you know, memberships or partnerships like that, like NZMCA, basically. It's valuable because they have a different insight, and that helps us basically to help them, who then help us.
And we just don't think about restriction. If we think about education, infrastructure, and controlling, those are the three aspects. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you can't go there, you can't go there. Just if we educate people, we provide the infrastructure, we can control the situation, I would think. Then you don't have to worry about, you might have, you know, areas like urban areas and stuff where there's some restrictions, but as far as our backyard, I can't see why we would need to go down that avenue where you're banning it in whole areas. And
we will come to you with some potential solutions based on the conversation today. So thank you for your time. That felt like 5 minutes, but it's best part of 3 hours gone really quickly.